There is a 7-minute audio recording sitting in a vault somewhere that almost nobody has ever heard. It is the fully voiced SpongeBob pilot episode where the main character is called SpongeBoy the entire time. Tom Kenny's voice, every line, never released once in 25 years. That recording is just the beginning of what this video is about. Most people think they know SpongeBob. They know the memes and the episodes. But the show has a history underneath its surface that almost nobody talks about. Bikini Bottom was named after a real location where the American government forcibly removed an entire community and then detonated 67 nuclear weapons. The creator spent his lifetime refusing to let his characters sell fast food to children, and within years of his death, they were doing exactly that. One episode got quietly pulled from streaming for 6 years with no announcement. Another depicted a character being psychologically tortured until he lay down in a road waiting to be hit by a bus, and it never got touched. A petition signed by over 1 million people asked for a single song at the Super Bowl, and the night ended with most of those people feeling genuinely cheated. This is not a video about theories. It is a video about what SpongeBob actually was, what happened to it, and who the man was that built it and spent his life trying to protect it. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get into it. The name that almost ruined everything. There is a piece of audio sitting somewhere in the world that almost nobody has heard. It is a 7-minute recording of the SpongeBob pilot episode, fully voiced by Tom Kenny, where the main character never once gets called SpongeBob. He gets called SpongeBoy. The show was going to be called SpongeBob Ahoy, not SpongeBob SquarePants. And if a very small legal problem had not gotten in the way at the very last second, the character you grew up watching would have had a completely different name, and the show might have turned out to be something no generation ever got attached to at all. Steven Hillenberg spent years building SpongeBob before the show ever aired. He was a marine biology teacher in California in the 1980s who also loved to draw. He created a comic book called The Intertidal Zone to teach his students about ocean life. One of the characters in that comic was a sea sponge named Bob, who acted as a kind of host, explaining things to the reader. That Bob the Sponge is where everything eventually came from. When Hillenberg left teaching to go to animation school, and later ended up working on Rocko's Modern Life at Nickelodeon, he brought the idea with him. He started developing a whole underwater world, filling it with characters, giving each one a personality. And the main character, the one at the center of everything, was SpongeBoy. SpongeBoy had no last name. The show was SpongeBoy Ahoy. That was the title Hillenberg pitched to Nickelodeon, the title they approved, and the title that voice actors were recording lines for. Tom Kenny, who had become the voice of the character through a series of auditions and creative sessions with Hillenberg, recorded the entire first pilot using that name. Every line, every joke, every moment in those 7 minutes, the character was SpongeBoy. Then Nickelodeon's legal team looked into it. The name was already taken. It had already been registered as someone else's. The exact product that used the SpongeBoy name has been argued about for years. For a long time, the story passed around was that it was a mop, and Tom Kenny even said in an interview that SpongeBoy was a mop or something. But in 2022, a researcher named Kid Leaves Stoop dug into it and found that there is no record of a SpongeBoy mop ever existing as a registered product in the 1990s. A character called SpongeBoy had also appeared in a comic called Flaming Carrot, which complicates the picture further. What is certain is that the Nickelodeon legal department found something that blocked the name. The news came after the pilot had already been fully recorded, and the whole thing had to be rethought. Hillenberg was not willing to lose the word sponge. That was non-negotiable for him. His reason was practical and a little funny. He had already watched early test audiences look at his character and think the main character was a block of cheese. A yellow rectangular shape living underwater did not automatically read as a sponge to most people. Hillenberg needed the name to tell the audience what they were looking at, or he was going to spend the entire run of the show fighting against the cheese confusion. So whatever came next had to have sponge in it. He landed on SpongeBob. The Bob came from the original character in the Intertidal Zone, keeping a thread of connection back to where the whole thing started. But the last name, the SquarePants part, that came from somewhere unexpected. It was not Hillenberg who came up with it. It was Tom Kenny. During one of the early creative sessions where everyone was sitting around looking at drawings and talking about the show, Kenny looked at a picture of the character and said something to the effect of, "Look at this sponge in square pants," thinking he can get a job in a fast food place. It was a throwaway observation, but Hillenberg heard it and immediately knew it was right. He said he loved the phrase and felt that SquarePants, as a last name, perfectly captured the kind of nerdy, awkward, overly dressed energy the character was supposed to have. A sponge in square pants. That is the whole character in 3 words. So the full name, SpongeBob SquarePants, came together partly from an old comic, partly from a legal problem, and partly from a voice actor making a joke. That is how close the show came to not being what it is. The pilot episode that was recorded with the SpongeBoy name still exists somewhere. The audio where Tom Kenny voices the character using that name was confirmed to have been recorded, and a 2006 interview acknowledged it directly. But nobody in the public has heard it. It has never been released, never turned up in any DVD bonus feature, never leaked online in any form. It is one of the most wanted pieces of lost SpongeBob material in the entire fan community. And as of right now, it is simply gone. You can hear Tom Kenny talk about it. You cannot hear the recording itself. The name change forced another adjustment that almost never gets talked about. The show's original title, SpongeBoy Ahoy, could not simply swap one word for another and become SpongeBob Ahoy. That title would have worked fine, but Nickelodeon and Hillenberg settled on SpongeBob SquarePants as the full title of the show. The decision to use the last name as the title, rather than something more like SpongeBob the Sponge or SpongeBob of Bikini Bottom, changed the whole feel of the show. SquarePants in the title sounds ridiculous. It is supposed to sound ridiculous. Hillenberg wanted a title that immediately felt strange and slightly off, because the show was supposed to feel that way. A kid's cartoon about a sea sponge named after his pants is already telling you something before a single episode has aired. There is something worth sitting with here. Hillenberg had been building this world since the mid-1980s, had left a stable teaching career to go back to school for animation in 1987, had spent years working his way into the industry through Rocko's Modern Life, had pitched SpongeBob to Nickelodeon and gotten it approved, had done all the voice work for the pilot, and then at the absolute last moment, before any of it went anywhere, the name he had been using for years was taken. Not close to taken, actually taken. The recording had to stop. Everything had to pause. The character had to be renamed from the ground up. And somehow, that last-minute scramble produced SpongeBob SquarePants, which became the longest-running show in Nickelodeon history, one of the highest-grossing animated franchises of all time, generating over $16 billion in merchandise revenue, and a cultural touchstone for multiple generations of children around the world. The Cheeseman theory never got to survive. SpongeBob did. One more thing about the name that is easy to miss. Hillenberg himself once worked as a fry cook and lobster boiler at a seafood restaurant in Maine during summers after high school. The character he eventually named SpongeBob, whose entire identity is built around being the best fry cook in the ocean, carries a real piece of Hillenberg's own life inside that job. SpongeBob's love of cooking and his pride in doing that job well are not random character choices. They came from someone who actually stood behind a grill, served people food, and found meaning in it. The name might have changed at the last minute, but the soul of the character was always there. __quote _0___. That soul, though, was almost immediately put at risk by something far bigger than a naming dispute. Because the place where SpongeBob lives has a history so dark and specific that it changes what the entire show feels like once you know it. Bikini Bottom is not just a funny underwater city. It was named after a real location. And what happened at that location is one of the most disturbing things the American government has ever done to a group of people. That story comes next. Section 2. Bikini Bottom was built on a graveyard. Most people who watched SpongeBob as kids never thought too hard about the name Bikini Bottom. It sounds like a joke. A bikini has a bottom. SpongeBob lives at the bottom of the sea. Ha! Moving on. But the name is not a random pun. It is not just wordplay. Bikini Bottom is named after a real place, a real island, and what happened at that island is one of the most painful and overlooked stories in American history. Once you know it, the cheerful yellow world of Bikini Bottom sits a little differently in your memory. Bikini Atoll is a real location in the Pacific Ocean, part of a chain of islands called the Marshall Islands, sitting roughly halfway between Hawaii and Papua New Guinea. It is a ring of small islands wrapped around a lagoon, the kind of place that looks like paradise in photographs. Clear water, white sand, palm trees. The people who lived there, the Bikinian people, had been on those islands for generations. They fished, they farmed, they built their lives there. In 1946, about 167 of them were living on the atoll when American military officials arrived and told them they needed to leave. The reason given to the Bikinian people was that the United States wanted to test weapons there, and that the testing would benefit all of mankind. The leader of the Bikinian community, King Judah, reportedly agreed to the request, saying his people would go wherever God wished. What the Bikinian people were not told clearly enough was that they would not be coming back. Not for a short time, not ever. They were relocated to Rongerik Atoll, a smaller island about 125 miles to the east. Rongerik could not support the population. The food supply was not enough. Within 2 years, the Bikinian people were experiencing serious hunger. They were moved again, and then again, bouncing between temporary locations while the United States proceeded to use their home for something that would make it permanently unlivable. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States detonated 67 nuclear weapons in and around Bikini Atoll. 67. Some were dropped from planes, some were detonated on towers built on the islands, some were set off underwater. The underwater detonation is particularly important to the SpongeBob story because the shape of the explosion from an underwater nuclear blast, that distinctive column of water and debris rising up from the surface, is reportedly replicated in the show. Nearly every large explosion in SpongeBob produces a shape that mirrors the photographs taken of those underwater tests at Bikini. Most viewers never knew what they were looking at. The largest test of all happened on March 1st, 1954. It was called Castle Bravo. The bomb was a hydrogen bomb, far more powerful than anything tested before, and it turned out to be far more powerful than even the scientists expected. The explosion was equivalent to the force of roughly 1,000 bombs the size of the one dropped on Hiroshima. It destroyed 3 islands entirely. It sent radioactive material across hundreds of miles of ocean. It contaminated the surrounding water, the fish, the air, and people on nearby islands who had not been relocated. The fallout from Castle Bravo affected communities far beyond the immediate test zone and caused health problems that lasted for decades. The crater left by Castle Bravo on the floor of the lagoon is still there. It is roughly a mile wide and 250 feet deep. The lagoon that SpongeBob SquarePants is set beneath contains, in real life, a massive crater left by the most powerful nuclear weapon the United States ever detonated above ground. In the 1970s, after years of pressure and promises, the United States government allowed about 100 Bikinian people to return to their home islands. The government had declared the islands safe. The Bikinians began trying to rebuild their lives there. 4 years later, in 1978, they were removed again. Tests had found that the people who had returned were now carrying more radioactive material in their bodies than almost any other group of humans ever studied. The food they were eating, the coconuts and the fish, was still contaminated. The islands were not safe. They had never been safe. The government had been wrong, or had known and said nothing. The Bikinian people have never been able to go home permanently since. Radiation from nuclear testing does not disappear quickly. Scientists estimate that Bikini Atoll will not reach safe levels for hundreds to thousands of years. The displacement that began in 1946 is still happening. The people who were told they were being asked to give up their home temporarily for the good of all mankind are still waiting. This is the place SpongeBob SquarePants is named after. Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, confirmed this directly in a 2015 interview. He was asked about the popular fan theory that SpongeBob and his friends are mutated creatures created by nuclear testing. Kenny acknowledged the connection and said that Bikini Bottom is kind of named after Bikini Atoll, where they did nuclear testing decades ago. He said he did not personally think SpongeBob and his friends were mutations, but he confirmed the naming connection without hesitation, because it has never been a secret. It is written into the geography of the show. The writer and voice actor Doug Lawrence, who voices Plankton and has been part of the show since the beginning, went significantly further in the same 2024 Esquire reunion interview where the cast discussed fan theories. Lawrence said the nuclear test site idea was actually part of the fun of developing the show. He said that in the early stages of production, there were real conversations about how far they were going to take the concept of Bikini Bottom being a nuclear test site. He confirmed the writers discussed the idea that the world above the surface was gone, that the whole world was dead except for Bikini Bottom, and that what the audience was watching was literally what was left after everything above the ocean had ended. In Lawrence's words, "The world upstairs is gone." That is a genuinely dark creative foundation for a children's cartoon about a happy sponge who loves his job. The show does not explain this, it does not announce it, but the physical evidence is in the show for anyone paying attention. Those explosion shapes that mirror the photographs from nuclear tests. The fact that the characters are sea creatures who talk, drive, build cities, run businesses, play instruments, and act exactly like humans, which is exactly what mutation from generations of radiation exposure in a contained environment might theoretically produce in a cartoon logic. Sandy Cheeks, a squirrel living underwater in a controlled dome, is not a random character choice either. There is a documented historical note that squirrels and other small mammals were placed on ships during some of the nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll. A land animal living in a special protected environment at the bottom of a nuclear-contaminated sea is not as random as it seems. None of this was confirmed as intentional design by Steven Hillenberg himself. Hillenberg was a marine biologist and animator who designed the show with affection and absurdist energy, and the people closest to him consistently described SpongeBob as being genuinely innocent, not secretly dark. But the writers around him, the writers who helped shape the show across its run, have confirmed the nuclear test site concept was in the room. It was discussed. It was considered. And the name was chosen knowing full well what Bikini Atoll was. The irony of the whole thing sits in two directions at once. On one side, you have the Bikinian people, a real community who lost their home to nuclear testing, whose islands are still contaminated, and whose forced removal is one of the clearest examples of the American government treating Pacific Islanders as if their lives mattered less than military experiments. On the other side, you have Bikini Bottom, the most cheerful fictional location in the history of children's television, a place where everyone is happy most of the time, where the sun shines at the bottom of the ocean, where the worst problem in the world is plankton trying to steal a burger recipe. The show named its paradise after a real paradise that was destroyed. Whether that was a deliberate comment on something, or simply the result of a marine biologist liking the sound of the name and the pun it contained, the gap between the real Bikini Atoll and the cartoon Bikini Bottom is enormous. One is a place where families were told to leave temporarily and never got to come back. The other is a place where a sponge has lived in the same pineapple for over 25 years without a single thing permanently going wrong. There is a small but notable detail that shows up in the show itself. When the Bikini Atoll Island is shown in the opening credits and in various episode transitions, it appears as a small tropical island with 3 palm trees sitting peacefully above the waterline. According to the Christmas Who audio commentary, Stephen Hillenberg filmed the Bikini Atoll Island footage himself at his friend Steve Belfer's house in a backyard pool in California. So the real Bikini Atoll, the contaminated and abandoned island that real people were forced to leave, is represented in SpongeBob by a shot of a plastic toy island in someone's swimming pool in California. That detail lands differently once you know the full history. The bikini swimsuit itself, by the way, is also named after Bikini Atoll. A French designer named Louis Riard introduced the two-piece swimsuit in July 1946, 4 days after the first nuclear test at Bikini Atoll was broadcast around the world. He named his design after the test site because he wanted to suggest that its impact would be as explosive as the bomb. So Bikini Bottom, the fictional underwater city, shares its name not just with a nuclear test site, but also with a swimsuit named after a nuclear explosion. The whole thing spirals outward if you follow it long enough. What the show never tells you, what almost no child watching it ever thought about, is that Bikini Bottom exists in the space between a real human tragedy and a cartoon joke. The people of Bikini Atoll did not get to stay in their paradise. The sea creatures of Bikini Bottom never have to leave theirs. That is either a coincidence, or it is the most quietly uncomfortable thing in the history of Saturday morning television. __, quote _1__. But the darkness hidden in the name of the show is just the beginning of what got hidden in the show itself. Because the man who created SpongeBob also built the show around a set of rules that he never broke while he was in charge. And some of those rules reveal exactly what kind of story he was really trying to tell. Starting with a fact about the main character that sounds impossible until you understand who Stephen Hillenberg actually was. Section 3. Squidward is not a squid and never was. There is a character in SpongeBob SquarePants who has the word squid in his name, lives next to a sponge, plays a clarinet badly, and has spent over 25 years being one of the most recognizable faces in the history of animated television. His name is Squidward, and he is not a squid. He has never been a squid. He was designed from the very beginning to be a completely different animal, and the person who made that choice was Stephen Hillenberg himself, who was a marine biologist and knew exactly what he was doing when he did it. Squidward Tentacles is an octopus. This was confirmed by Hillenberg directly in a special segment included on the DVD of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, released in 2004. In that segment, Hillenberg introduces Squidward and says the words, "This is Squidward the octopus." He then explains his reasoning. He liked the octopus for this character, he said, because octopuses have such a large, bulbous head. And Squidward thinks he is an intellectual, so of course he is going to have a large, bulbous head. The design choice was made to match the personality. A big, round, self-important head for a character who considers himself the smartest and most talented creature in Bikini Bottom. An octopus gave Hillenberg the shape he needed. A squid, with its more narrow and cone-shaped head, did not. So the design is an octopus. The personality is an octopus. The species has been confirmed as an octopus multiple times across interviews and episodes. In Season 10, the episode Feral Friends goes as far as to identify Squidward's specific species as a giant Pacific octopus. That is about as official as it gets. And yet his name is Squidward. The reason is simple and a little absurd. The name Squidward is a combination of the word squid and the name Edward. It works as a name. It sounds like a real name, if a very strange one. It has rhythm to it. It is memorable. The alternative that was considered was Octoward, taking the same approach with the word octopus instead. Roger Bumpus, the voice actor who has played Squidward since the very first episode in 1999, addressed this directly in the DVD extras. He said Octoword just did not work. And he was right. Say it out loud once. Octoword. It does not land the same way. Squidward rolls off the tongue. Octoword sounds like a mistake. So they kept Squidward, knowing it was technically wrong, because the name was better than being technically right. This kind of choice, picking what works over what is accurate, shows up in how Squidward was drawn as well. A real octopus has 8 arms. Squidward, almost always, has 6. The reason Hillenberg gave was that drawing 8 limbs on a character who walks around, gestures, plays instruments, and interacts with other characters every single episode would be extremely difficult for the animation team to manage consistently. 6 limbs was simpler. 6 limbs was manageable. So 6 it was. The decision was practical. The animators would not have to count to 8 every time they drew him moving through a scene. There are exactly 2 moments in the entire run of the show where Squidward is shown with a full set of 8 limbs. The first is in a live-action sequence in the Season 2 episode Pressure, where Hillenberg briefly showed what the characters would look like as their real-world animal equivalents. The second is a brief flash in the Season 9 episode Sold. Those 2 moments are the only times in over 25 years of television that Squidward has the correct number of limbs for the animal he is supposed to be. Every other appearance in every other episode, he has 6. The Japanese version of the show handled the naming problem in its own way. Japanese translators gave Squidward a different first name entirely, Ricardo. The name comes from combining the Japanese word for squid, which is Ika, with the name Ricardo. So in Japan, the character is still being referenced as squid-like in name, even though he is an octopus, because the translators were keeping the spirit of the original even while adapting it for a different language. The last name Tentacles stayed the same. Now here is the part of the Squidward story that almost nobody talks about, but that changes how the character reads once you understand it. Hillenberg was not just being casual when he designed Squidward as someone who believes deeply in his own talent and intelligence. That was a very deliberate psychological portrait. The large head is not just a visual joke. It is a statement about the character from the inside out. Squidward is someone who has constructed his entire identity around the idea that he is gifted, that he deserves recognition, that the world has simply failed to notice how special he is. Hillenberg gave him the physical form that matched that internal belief. Big head, big ego, big hollow spaces where the self-awareness should be. The octopus connection runs deeper than most people register. Octopuses in real life are genuinely among the most intelligent creatures in the ocean. They can solve problems, use tools, recognize individual human faces, and escape from containers that seem impossible to get out of. They are the actual smartest thing in most marine environments. Hillenberg knew this. He studied these animals, and he gave the show's self-proclaimed intellectual the form of the creature that actually has the most claim to that title in the real ocean, while also making that character consistently wrong about almost everything. There is something quietly perfect about that. Squidward thinks he is the smartest one. He is shaped like the animal that actually is the smartest one. And he spends every episode being outwitted, embarrassed, humiliated, or ignored. The gap between what Squidward is and what Squidward believes he is was built into his design from day one by a man who knew exactly what an octopus was capable of. The clarinet is part of the same construction. Squidward plays the clarinet constantly and considers himself a brilliant musician. The show treats his playing as objectively terrible. Other characters wince, animals flee. The sound is depicted as painful. But Squidward never stops believing he is good. He practices, he performs, he puts himself forward. The gap between his belief in himself and the reality everyone else experiences is the engine of most of his comedy, and also the engine of most of his tragedy. because the show sometimes lets you feel how much it costs him to keep believing in something the world keeps refusing to confirm. Hillenberg said in various interviews that he had been a band geek in high school and had played the trumpet. There is a real version of Squidward's experience in Hillenberg's own life, the feeling of loving something that does not love you back the same way, the specific embarrassment of caring deeply about an art form and not quite being as good at it as you need to be. Hillenberg built that feeling into a character and then named him incorrectly after a sea animal just because it sounded better. The voice Roger Bumpus created for Squidward is worth understanding as its own piece of the design. Bumpus described Squidward from the beginning as a very nasal, monotone kind of guy. The flatness of the delivery was intentional. Someone who is permanently disappointed, permanently above it all, permanently waiting for the world to catch up to his level, does not speak with a lot of emotional range. He speaks flatly because everything below his standards is not worth getting excited about. The voice communicates the psychology. Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, has said in interviews that watching Bumpus record Squidward's emotional outbursts in the recording studio is something to witness, because Bumpus would physically turn red during the big moments of frustration and anger. The performance lives in Bumpus in a real way, even though the character is supposed to be a cartoon octopus who thinks he is a squid. There is one more thing about Squidward that is almost never discussed and that deserves its own moment. Hillenberg's original instinct was to give Squidward the ability to squirt ink, because that is what octopuses actually do. He tried it, he wrote jokes around it, he storyboarded sequences with it, and then he cut the whole thing, because every time he looked at it, the ink squirting looked exactly like the character was going to the bathroom. In Hillenberg's words, it always looked like he was pooping his pants. So one of the most accurate biological details about the animal Squidward is secretly based on was removed from the show entirely because it was too gross even by SpongeBob standards. The ink ability did eventually appear in a small number of later episodes, including Giant Squidward and Ink Lemonade, but it was always handled carefully and surrounded by jokes that acknowledged how strange it looked. Hillenberg's original instinct to cut it was, on reflection, probably correct. The image of Squidward squirting ink when startled is funny for about 4 seconds, and then immediately becomes something you cannot unsee. What all of this adds up to is a character who was designed with enormous care on every level, given the wrong name on purpose, given fewer limbs than his actual species for practical reasons, and built to embody a very specific and very human kind of pain. The pain of believing in yourself when no one else does. The pain of being surrounded by cheerful, successful, uncomplicated people who seem to coast through life while you struggle and strain and get nowhere. Hillenberg gave that feeling the form of a large-headed octopus called Squidward, put him next to the happiest character in the history of children's television, and let the contrast do most of the work. Every child who grew up watching SpongeBob absorbed something through Squidward that they probably could not have named at the time. The feeling that wanting something real and not getting it is different from the kind of failure that is played for laughs. Squidward's losses hurt in a way that Patrick's confusion never does, because Squidward knows what he is losing. That awareness is what makes him the most human character in a show full of talking sea animals, regardless of what you call him or how many arms he has. The name is wrong, the arm count is wrong, the biology is approximate at best, but the character is one of the most precise emotional portraits in the history of the show, and it was that way from the very beginning. __quote _to___. Now knowing that the show was built on these kinds of careful, layered choices, it becomes interesting to ask what the creator intended the whole world of Bikini Bottom to actually mean. Because Hillenberg did not just design his characters casually, he built the entire show around a specific set of rules he held on to tightly, and that shaped everything about what SpongeBob was allowed to be. And one of those rules reveals something about the Krabby Patty that the show has spent 25 years pretending to keep secret. Section 4. The Krabby Patty secret was never actually a secret. The biggest running mystery in SpongeBob SquarePants is not really a mystery at all. The show spent 25 years pretending to hide the secret of the Krabby Patty formula, building entire episodes around Plankton trying to steal it, locking it in safes, putting it under mattresses, writing it in gibberish so the audience could never read it, even when the camera showed the bottle. The whole show treats the formula like the most important secret in the universe. And the actual answer has been sitting in public interviews for years, confirmed by multiple people who worked on the show, including Stephen Hillenberg himself. There is no meat in a Krabby Patty. There has never been any meat in a Krabby Patty. The Krabby Patty is entirely vegan, containing no animal products of any kind. That was always the plan. That was Hillenberg's decision from the very beginning, and it was not arbitrary. It came directly from the world he built. Hillenberg was a marine biologist. He spent years studying ocean life, teaching people about the creatures that live in the sea, and developing genuine affection for the animals he worked with. When he built Bikini Bottom, he populated it with fish who talk, crabs who run restaurants, squirrels who do science experiments, and sponges who fry burgers. These are not background decorations. They are the characters. They are the citizens. The fish swimming past the Krusty Krab window are the same kind of creature as the customers sitting inside it. Making the main food product of the show a burger made from one of those creatures would mean that Mr. Krabs is selling the bodies of the same people who eat at his restaurant. Writer and voice actor Doug Lawrence, who voices Plankton and has been part of the show since its earliest days, confirmed this directly. He stated that the show's writers are not allowed to depict fish as food, or at minimum, are not allowed to show fish eating each other as food. He said the Krabby Patty has never been meat. The only place in Bikini Bottom where anything resembling real animal products gets served is the Chum Bucket, Plankton's restaurant. And the Chum Bucket is the show's running joke for food so terrible that no one ever eats there voluntarily. The villain's restaurant is the one that might actually have real animal ingredients. The hero's restaurant does not. Executive producer Vincent Waller confirmed the same thing publicly in 2017. He said there is absolutely no meat in the Krabby Patty and that there is no animal product in there, something he described as always having been planned by Hillenberg. Tom Kenny, who has voiced SpongeBob since the beginning and knows the character better than almost anyone alive, made his own contribution to the question when asked directly. Krabby Patties are hummus. He was joking, but the joke only works because the answer is already established. The patty is plant-based. SpongeBob, the greatest fry cook in the ocean, has spent his entire career cooking vegetables. This confirmation matters more than it might seem on the surface. It means that the show's entire central conflict, the one that drives more episodes than almost any other single idea, is Plankton desperately trying to steal the recipe for a veggie burger. A tiny, one-eyed villain has devoted his entire existence, his marriage, his career, his sanity, to obtaining the formula for a burger that does not contain any animal products. He has built robots, disguised himself as SpongeBob, tried to brainwash the entire population of Bikini Bottom, and at one point nearly taken over the whole world, all in pursuit of a plant-based patty recipe. The scale of his obsession versus what he is actually chasing is one of the longest unspoken jokes in the show's history. Now here is where the confirmed information and the intentional mystery separate. Hillenberg confirmed the patty is vegan. He confirmed the formula itself contains no animal products. What he never revealed, and what multiple people around the show have confirmed will probably never be revealed, is the specific ingredients. What is actually in the patty? What makes it taste the way it does? What combination of plant-based ingredients produces a burger so good that the entire population of Bikini Bottom is completely devoted to it, that withdrawal from it causes physical symptoms, that even Squidward, who resents almost everything, secretly broke into the Krusty Krab at night just to eat from the patty vault when no one was watching. Vincent Waller was asked in 2017 whether the full formula would ever be revealed in a future episode. His answer was that he would not count on it. He added something more significant. Hillenberg, who was still alive in 2017 but had already been diagnosed with ALS, was the only person who had truly seen the complete formula. When Hillenberg died in November 2018, whatever specific ingredients he had imagined for that patty went with him. The full secret formula, if it ever existed as a real, detailed recipe in Hillenberg's mind, is gone. The show encoded this uncertainty into the episodes themselves. In the Season 6 episode, Krabby Road, the camera gets a clear, extended look at the piece of paper inside the formula bottle. The writing on it is complete gibberish. Not blurry, not obscured at an angle, not too small to read. Gibberish. Made-up letters that do not spell anything. Vincent Waller confirmed on social media that this was intentional, that the ingredients were written as gibberish specifically so the audience would never be able to read the true formula, even in a moment where the show appeared to be showing it to them. The show also spent years dropping fake answers. In Plankton's army, Plankton finally gets his hands on the formula after an elaborate scheme, and the secret ingredient is revealed to be 4 heaping pounds of freshly ground plankton. This is a fake formula Mr. Krabs planted to misdirect Plankton. In Spy Buddies, the formula appears as a literal math equation. In various other episodes, ingredients get mentioned in passing. Flour appears in the Great Patty Caper. Barnacle shavings appear. Salt appears. These are real confirmed ingredients for the standard burger construction, but not the secret. The patty itself, the specific plant-based recipe that makes the whole thing work, remains unspoken. The show even has an in-world confirmation that the most important ingredient cannot be written down or stolen. SpongeBob states multiple times across different episodes that love is an essential part of the Krabby Patty. This is not presented as a metaphor in the show's logic. It is presented as literal. In the episode where King Neptune tries to make Krabby Patties using his magical powers, his patties are terrible despite being technically perfect, because, as SpongeBob explains, perfect patties are made with love, not magic. The formula matters. The ingredients matter, but without SpongeBob's specific emotional investment in the process of making each patty, the result is different. The show has always been telling you that the real secret is not something you can read off a piece of paper. Carolyn Lawrence, who voices Sandy Cheeks, gave perhaps the most honest answer when she was asked directly what she thinks is in the Krabby Patty. She said she genuinely believes the secret ingredient is love. She called it dorky but true. She said she thinks it is the love SpongeBob puts into cooking. For a show that never officially answers the question, the voice actors have been pointing at the same answer for years. There is a specific episode called Just One Bite from Season 3 that shows what the Krabby Patty actually does to people on a psychological level. And it is one of the stranger episodes in the show's history when you look at it closely. Squidward has spent years claiming to hate Krabby Patties. He has never tasted one, and he is proud of this. SpongeBob eventually gets him to try a bite. Squidward pretends not to like it. But in the dream sequence that follows, Squidward marries a Krabby Patty in a full wedding ceremony. He has a child with it. The dream is presented with complete sincerity from inside the logic of Squidward's sleeping mind. When Squidward wakes up, his obsession with the patty drives him to break into the Krusty Krab alone at night, get into the patty vault, and eat so many patties that he literally explodes. The episode is depicting what the show calls Krabby Patty withdrawal, a real in-universe condition where the body craves the patty so strongly that rational behavior stops. A plant-based burger that produces this level of psychological and physical craving in everyone who eats it, that has driven a villain to spend his entire life trying to obtain its recipe, that cannot be replicated even by a god using magic, because the ingredient that matters most is the emotional state of the person making it, is not really a food product in the traditional sense. The show has spent 25 years building something that functions more like a symbol than a sandwich. The Krabby Patty is the thing SpongeBob makes when he is fully himself. It cannot be separated from him. You cannot extract the formula from the cook. This also explains something about Hillenberg's decision to never reveal the formula that goes beyond just wanting to maintain a running joke. Revealing the formula would require the show to commit to an answer, and any specific answer would be smaller than what the mystery allows the patty to represent. Once you say it is 4 specific ingredients combined in a specific way, it stops being a symbol and starts being a recipe. The show was always smarter than that. What Hillenberg did confirm, through the various things he said publicly before his death, is that the world of Bikini Bottom has its own internal logic, and that logic was built on care. The Krabby Patty being vegan is part of that care. It means the citizens of Bikini Bottom are not eating each other. It means SpongeBob's love of his work is not tangled up in anything violent or predatory. The happiest character in the show makes the most beloved food in the show, and that food is, at its core, something gentle. The formula will never be fully revealed now. Hillenberg is gone. Waller made clear it was not coming. The gibberish on the paper in Krabby Road is probably the closest the show will ever get to showing it directly. And honestly, the people who made the show understood that the mystery being maintained forever is the correct ending to that particular story. Some things are better as questions. __quote _3___. What is not a question is what Hillenberg himself was willing to fight for when it came to his characters being used outside the show. Because while the Krabby Patty stayed safely inside the screen, the world outside was putting enormous pressure on Hillenberg to use SpongeBob to sell real food to real children. And the position he took on that fight says everything about what kind of person he actually was. Section 5. The man who said no to billions of dollars. By the time SpongeBob SquarePants hit its stride in the early 2000s, it was not just a popular cartoon. It was a money machine, on a scale that is genuinely difficult to wrap your head around. By 2009, Nickelodeon was earning an estimated $8 billion every single year from SpongeBob merchandise alone. $8 billion annually from one cartoon character. T-shirts, backpacks, lunchboxes, toys, bed sheets, video games, birthday party supplies, Halloween costumes, pencil cases, and on and on and on. The yellow sponge was everywhere. He was on everything. And Steven Hillenberg hated parts of it. Not all of it. Hillenberg understood that merchandise was part of how the entertainment industry worked. He was not naive about money or business. But there was a specific category of commercial deal that he refused to participate in, that he pushed back against, and that he drew a very clear line around for as long as he was alive and in control of his creation. That category was fast food. Specifically, using SpongeBob and his friends to sell actual food products to children. The reason Hillenberg gave for this position is one of the most honest things any major entertainment creator has ever said publicly about the business side of their work. He explained it in a 2004 interview with the New York Times while promoting the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. He said that SpongeBob's job as a fry cook at the Krusty Krab was intentionally ironic within the show. The whole point of SpongeBob loving his fast food job, dreaming about it, being completely devoted to it, was that most people in the real world do not think a fast food job is a great thing to aspire to. That gap between what society values and what SpongeBob values is part of what makes the character work. SpongeBob is sincere about something the world treats as small. That sincerity is the joke, and also the heart of the character. If SpongeBob then turned around and appeared in actual fast food advertising, selling actual burgers and fries to actual children, the irony collapses entirely. The character stops being a gentle commentary on ambition and happiness and becomes a vehicle for selling unhealthy food to kids. Hillenberg said directly that he did not want to become the person serving up food that is not good for children. He said that crossing that specific line, having his characters appear in contact with real food in ads aimed at kids, was something he was not willing to do. He acknowledged that some commercial partnerships were unavoidable. He specifically mentioned Burger King as an example of a deal he was comfortable with, because Burger King was making SpongeBob toys and watches, not using SpongeBob to convince children to eat Burger King food. The characters could appear on packaging. The characters could be made into Happy Meal toys. But the characters could not hold a burger and tell a child to eat it. That was the line. Hillenberg held this line throughout his time as showrunner on seasons 1 through 3, and he continued pushing back on it even after he stepped down as showrunner in 2004. His position was known well enough within Nickelodeon and within the entertainment press that it was reported as a notable fact about him during his lifetime. There was also the specific issue of the Krabby Patty itself. The Krabby Patty, as established in the previous section, is a vegan burger within the logic of the show. Hillenberg had confirmed this publicly. He had built the show's entire food economy around the idea that the residents of Bikini Bottom do not eat each other, and that SpongeBob's signature creation is made without animal products. This made the idea of turning the Krabby Patty into a real-world fast food product particularly complicated, because any fast food restaurant that wanted to sell a real Krabby Patty would almost certainly be selling a beef burger under that name, which would mean using SpongeBob to sell a product that directly contradicts what the Krabby Patty actually is in the canon of the show. According to people close to Hillenberg, there was even a proposal at some point for SpongeBob SquarePants fish sticks, which, given that the show takes place in the ocean and its main characters are anthropomorphic fish, would have been one of the more genuinely strange merchandise decisions in television history. That proposal apparently did not move forward. Hillenberg was also aware of what the SpongeBob brand was doing to the franchise's integrity, even without his direct involvement. By 2009, the advertising age estimate of $8 billion per year in merchandise put SpongeBob in the same category as some of the most aggressively marketed properties in entertainment history. The character he had designed to be innocent and sincere and free of the hipness and irony that dominated kids' entertainment in the late 1990s had become one of the most commercially saturated images on the planet. He told the Boston Globe in 2002 that it was almost like having a picture of your mother appear on everything in the world. The scale of it was something he had never remotely expected and never fully made peace with. He died on November 26, 2018, from complications related to ALS. He was 57 years old. And in the years immediately following his death, the commercial decisions around SpongeBob began moving in directions he had spent his lifetime opposing. The clearest example came in October 2024, when Wendy's, the fast food chain, launched what it called the Krabby Patty Collab as part of the show's 25th anniversary celebration. Wendy's created a real-world version of the Krabby Patty and sold it in restaurants across the United States. It was a beef burger. It used SpongeBob's characters in advertising. It was exactly the kind of deal Hillenberg had refused to allow while he was alive, using his characters to sell actual fast food to children, with the product being a meat burger sold under the name of a canonically vegan sandwich from the show. The fan response was immediate and not friendly. People who had grown up watching SpongeBob and who knew about Hillenberg's stated positions on fast food marketing pointed out the contradiction directly. The fact that the Wendy's Krabby Patty was a beef burger felt like an additional layer of disrespect on top of the core issue. It was not just that SpongeBob was being used to sell fast food. It was that the product being sold under the Krabby Patty name directly contradicted the canon of the show that Hillenberg had built and protected for his entire career. Nickelodeon and Paramount, who now control the SpongeBob franchise as part of the larger Paramount corporate structure, have the legal right to make these decisions. Hillenberg created SpongeBob, but he did not own it outright. Nickelodeon has always owned the property. This is a standard arrangement in the television industry, and Hillenberg knew it when he made the show. But knowing that a company has the legal right to do something and agreeing that they should do it are two different things. And the fan community's reaction to the Wendy's deal was largely a referendum on how much they trusted Paramount to honor what Hillenberg stood for. The irony that Hillenberg built into SpongeBob's job at the Krusty Krab, the gentle joke about a cheerful character devoting himself to something the world undervalues, took on a different shape in 2024. SpongeBob was now literally being used to sell the thing his entire character was supposed to comment on sideways. The distance between SpongeBob's fictional burger and a real fast food chain's beef burger collapsed completely, and Hillenberg was not around to push back. There is a version of this story that is just about money and corporate decisions and the way intellectual property works after its creator dies. That version is straightforward and a little depressing. But there is another version that is about what Hillenberg was actually trying to protect and why. He was a marine biologist who became an animator because he wanted to make something that felt genuinely innocent in a media landscape that was increasingly cynical and commercial. He built the show around a character whose defining quality is sincerity, who loves his job not because it makes him rich or famous, but because he is genuinely good at it and genuinely happy doing it. He made the Krabby Patty vegan because the world SpongeBob inhabits should not be one where the food chain operates the way it does in the real ocean. He refused to let his characters sell fast food because the moment SpongeBob appears holding a real burger and telling a real child to eat it, the sincerity is gone. It becomes advertising. And SpongeBob was never supposed to be advertising. The show has continued well past Hillenberg's death, with new episodes still being produced, spin-off series launched, and the franchise expanding in multiple directions. Some of those decisions, including the Camp Coral spin-off showing younger versions of the characters as children, were described by people who knew Hillenberg as things he would not have approved of. Paul Tibbitt, who served as showrunner after Hillenberg stepped down, said publicly that he did not think Hillenberg would have liked a SpongeBob Babies-style show. These are the kinds of decisions that get made when the person who created something is no longer there to say no. What Hillenberg's position on fast food advertising actually reveals, underneath the specific commercial argument, is the same thing that the best parts of SpongeBob itself reveal. He believed that what a piece of art stands for matters. He believed that who you let use your creation, and for what purpose, shapes what that creation means over time. He believed there was a line between the show and the world outside the show, and that crossing it carelessly would damage something real. He held that line for as long as he could. He could not hold it forever. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The fight over what SpongeBob was allowed to sell in the real world is one kind of battle about the show's integrity. But there is a different kind of battle, one that happened entirely inside the episodes themselves, where the show started doing things to its own characters that large portions of the audience found genuinely disturbing. And none of those things were as dark as what the writers did to a particular episode in Season 7 that has never been banned, never been pulled, and never been properly accounted for by anyone involved in making it. Section 6. The episode nobody banned, but everyone wishes they had. There is an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants that has never been pulled from rotation. It has never been banned. It has never received an official content warning from Nickelodeon. It aired on March 25, 2010. It has stayed available on streaming platforms. And it continues to exist in the show's catalog without any formal acknowledgement of what it actually contains. Its name is One Course Meal. It is Season 7, Episode 11, and it is, by a significant margin, the darkest thing the show has ever put on television under the banner of a children's cartoon. Not dark in the way that some SpongeBob episodes are unsettling in a surreal or visually strange way. Not dark the way a horror-adjacent episode like Squidward in Clarinetland or Rockabye Bivalve pushes against the edges of what the show is comfortable showing. Dark in a specific, real-world way. One Course Meal is an episode about psychological torture that ends with a character lying down in the middle of a road and waiting to be killed by an oncoming bus. It is a children's cartoon episode about a villain being driven to attempt suicide, and it plays the whole thing as comedy. The setup is straightforward. Plankton attempts another robbery of the Krabby Patty formula. It does not work. During the attempt, Pearl, Mr. Krabs' teenage whale daughter, enters the restaurant, and Plankton panics completely and flees. Mr. Krabs realizes something important. Plankton is terrified of whales. The reason the show gives for this fear is that a pod of whales once ate Plankton's entire family, consuming his ancestors whole. So the fear is not irrational. It is rooted in genuine generational trauma within the show's logic. Plankton is afraid of whales because whales eat plankton in real life, and the show established this as something Plankton carries personally. Mr. Krabs decides to use this information not to defend the Krusty Krab from future attacks, which would be a reasonable response, but to deliberately and repeatedly terrorize Plankton using his phobia as a weapon. He borrows one of Pearl's dresses, disguises himself as Pearl, and begins showing up at the chum bucket to frighten Plankton. He does this not once, not twice. He does this every day for 2 full weeks. 16 consecutive days of showing up at Plankton's home and workplace in disguise to trigger his deepest fear repeatedly, purely for the purpose of breaking him. The episode shows what 2 weeks of this does to Plankton. He stops sleeping. He starts having nightmares so severe that the episode depicts one in detail, a sequence where a demonic version of Pearl eats Plankton alive along with all of his family members. He stops functioning. He becomes unable to leave the chum bucket. His hair and fingernails grow long from neglect. He starts wearing tissue boxes on his feet like shoes. The episode is specifically referencing Howard Hughes, the famous businessman who became so mentally unwell in his later years that he stopped leaving his rooms and wore tissue boxes on his feet. This is a reference buried in a SpongeBob episode aimed at children, comparing Plankton's mental breakdown to a real person's documented psychological collapse. Then comes the moment the episode is remembered for. SpongeBob finds Plankton lying flat in the middle of a road. Not sitting, not standing, lying down, face up, in the path of traffic. SpongeBob asks what he is doing. Plankton says he is waiting for the 4 o'clock bus. He is not waiting for transportation. He is lying in the road waiting for the bus to hit him. SpongeBob, realizing what is happening, goes to Mr. Krabs to tell him. He says Plankton is laying in the street, forlorn. Mr. Krabs' response, his actual response, when told his actions have driven his rival to this point, is to laugh. He says really he is a mess, and laughs again. He does not stop what he is doing. He does not feel guilt. He finds it funny. SpongeBob explicitly calls Mr. Krabs out in this episode. He tells him directly that what he is doing is wrong. This is one of the relatively rare moments in the show's later seasons where a character voices the moral problem with what is happening on screen. SpongeBob does not approve. The show is technically acknowledging through SpongeBob that the behavior is unacceptable. But then SpongeBob, despite having just called out Mr. Krabs for his cruelty, helps Mr. Krabs again at the end of the episode by using holographic whales to scare Plankton away when Plankton finally attempts to get his revenge. SpongeBob helps the man who drove Plankton to attempt suicide keep his advantage over Plankton. The episode ends with Mr. Krabs having faced no real consequence and Plankton having gotten nothing. The person who wrote this episode was Doug Lawrence. Doug Lawrence also voices Plankton. He has been the voice of that character since the beginning of the show. He wrote an episode in which his own character is tortured into a mental breakdown and driven to an attempt to end his life. And the character responsible for that torture faces no punishment and gets to win. People on fan forums and in the SpongeBob community have been asking for years why Lawrence wrote this episode the way he wrote it, why the character he voices was treated this way. Lawrence has not offered a detailed public explanation. The episode writer Casey Alexander, who co-wrote One Course Meal, acknowledged the fan response in a small way. In 2015, a fan on Twitter named Rusty posted that they liked the episode as an unpopular opinion, directly tagging Alexander. Alexander responded by saying, "Rusty, you brave soul, you." That is the closest thing to a public acknowledgement from the writing side that the episode's reception was understood to be strongly negative. The episode contains a plot hole that compounds the problems with its premise. Plankton being afraid of whales is introduced as a new piece of information in One Course Meal, but in earlier episodes, Plankton had already encountered Pearl and other whales multiple times without any fear response. In the Season 3 episode, The Algae's Always Greener, Plankton swaps lives with Mr. Krabs and directly interacts with Pearl, even commenting on her size. In other episodes, including Jailbreak and Married to Money, Plankton encounters whales without the panic that One Course Meal treats as his defining phobia. The fear that forms the entire basis of the episode's plot was not established before the episode and was largely abandoned after it. What makes One Course Meal stand apart from the other episodes fans criticize from the show's middle and later seasons is not just that it is mean-spirited, though it is. It is that the cruelty in it is specific and recognizable in a way that cartoon slapstick usually is not. Mr. Krabs does not physically hurt Plankton. He does not use a weapon or a gadget or an elaborate scheme. He uses knowledge of what Plankton is most afraid of to psychologically destroy him over an extended period of time. He shows up repeatedly. He waits for the fear to do the damage. He watches the breakdown happen and enjoys it. The behavior in this episode maps almost precisely onto a real-world pattern of harassment that is specifically designed to cause psychological harm rather than physical harm. That the show frames Mr. Krabs as the protagonist of this episode. That the ending positions his victory as the correct outcome. That SpongeBob ultimately helps him despite having just objected to his behavior means the episode does not even have the honesty to fully commit to showing what Mr. Krabs is doing as wrong. It shows it, acknowledges it briefly through SpongeBob, and then rewards it anyway. The contrast with earlier versions of Mr. Krabs is part of what makes this so difficult to watch for people who grew up with the show. In the first 3 seasons, Mr. Krabs is greedy and occasionally selfish, but there is a version of him that has genuine warmth, that cares about SpongeBob, that has limits. The Mr. Krabs of One Course Meal has no limits. He does not stop when SpongeBob tells him what is happening to Plankton. He does not stop when he sees Plankton lying in the road. He laughs. The character had drifted so far from his original construction by Season 7 that the same name and same voice were attached to a fundamentally different person. Stephen Hillenberg came back to the show in 2015 after years away. He was heavily involved in production from that point until his ALS made it impossible. One Course Meal aired in 2010, during the period when Hillenberg was not in the building. Whether it would have made it through his oversight is impossible to know. What is known is that Hillenberg had established very specific rules about what the show was and what it was not. And an episode where the ostensible hero methodically psychologically destroys a villain to the point of attempted suicide, with no real consequence, does not fit neatly inside those rules. One Course Meal never got banned. Midlife Crustacean, which involved a panty raid and aired 7 years earlier, was quietly removed from rotation in 2018 and stayed off streaming for years. The episode about psychological torture and a character lying in a road, waiting to be hit by a bus, is still available for children to watch right now. What that says about what gets flagged and what does not about what the people in charge of the show's content consider acceptable versus unacceptable for its audience is a question the show has never fully answered. What is worth sitting with is this. The episode exists inside a show that, at its best, is one of the most emotionally precise and genuinely warm pieces of children's entertainment ever made. The same show that gave the world Band Geeks and Rock Bottom and the first 3 seasons of thoughtful, affectionate, carefully built storytelling also produced one-course meal. Both things are true. The show contained that capacity the whole time. It just needed the right circumstances and the right absence of guardrails to let it come out. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Speaking of Band Geeks, there is a story about that episode specifically that connects directly to one of the most emotional moments in sports television history. And it involves a petition signed by over 1 million people, a Super Bowl halftime show that let an enormous number of fans down, and a tribute to Steven Hillenberg that happened both publicly and privately on the same night in 2 completely different forms. Section 7, the petition, the Super Bowl, and the night 1 million people felt cheated. On November 26, 2018, Steven Hillenberg died. He was 57 years old. The cause was ALS, a disease that destroys the nerve cells that control movement and eventually makes it impossible to breathe. He had been diagnosed in March 2017 and had continued working on SpongeBob for as long as his body allowed. He died at his home near Los Angeles, and the news spread across the internet within hours. For millions of people who had grown up with SpongeBob, who had watched those first 3 seasons as children and carried them into adulthood, the loss was genuinely felt. Not in the way people mourn celebrities they have seen on a screen. In the specific way people mourn someone who shaped how they experienced the world when they were young and had not yet developed defenses against it. 2 days after Hillenberg died, a fan named Israel Kalunga created a petition on change.org. The petition had one request. It asked the NFL to play the song Sweet Victory during the halftime show at Super Bowl 53, which was scheduled for February 3, 2019, roughly 10 weeks away. The petition framed it as a tribute to Hillenberg's legacy and his contributions to an entire generation of children. Sweet Victory is a song by a musician named David Glenn Isley. It is a massive, over-the-top arena rock song built around the kind of guitar and keyboard combination that was everywhere in the 1980s. Big drums, big chorus, the kind of song that was designed to be played in a stadium during a moment of triumph. In the real world, before SpongeBob, it was a moderately known song that most people had never heard. Inside SpongeBob, it became one of the most beloved pieces of music the show ever used, and the reason for that is entirely contained in a single episode. Band Geeks aired on September 7, 2001. It is the second segment of Season 2, Episode 15. It was written by C.H. Greenblatt, Aaron Springer, and Meriwether Williams, and directed by Aaron Springer. The episode follows Squidward after his wealthy and successful former classmate, Squilliam Fancyson, calls to mock him and challenge him to perform at something called the Bubble Bowl with a marching band. Squidward does not have a marching band. He has never had a marching band. He has SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, Mr. Krabs, Mrs. Puff, and the other residents of Bikini Bottom, none of whom can play any instrument when the rehearsals begin. The episode builds through a series of increasingly disastrous rehearsal sequences where the band members injure each other, fight, and produce sounds that are genuinely painful to hear. Squidward loses hope multiple times. By the time the performance is supposed to happen, he has essentially given up. He believes he is about to be publicly humiliated in front of his rival and everyone who matters to him. He walks out to conduct, expecting disaster. What happens instead is that SpongeBob, who had secretly practiced with the band the night before, leads everyone through a performance of Sweet Victory that is completely, genuinely excellent. The stadium fills with the sound. The crowd goes wild. Squilliam passes out from shock, and Squidward stands at the front of it all with an expression that is different from any other expression the show had ever given him before. Not smugness, not relief, something quieter and more fragile than either of those things. The specific feeling of being, just for one moment, exactly who you always believed you were. The storyboard artists who worked on Band Geeks have described how they found Sweet Victory. They had been searching through a library of royalty-free music, looking for something to use in the performance sequence. They listened to marching band tune after marching band tune, and nothing worked. They needed music for the ending, and the ending had to feel like a real victory, not a joke about a cartoon character winning. Then they found Sweet Victory sitting among the other tracks, and it was immediately obvious. Storyboard artist Carl Greenblatt later recalled that when they heard it, they knew they had to use it. It stood out from everything else in the library. It was absurdly grand and completely sincere at the same time, which is exactly what the moment needed. The episode won the Golden Reel Award for Best Sound Editing in Television Animation in 2002. It is consistently ranked by fans as the single greatest episode in the show's history. Not the funniest, the best, the most complete, the one that does everything the show is capable of doing all at once, in 11 minutes, and sticks the landing. So when Israel Kalunga launched his petition asking the NFL to play Sweet Victory at Super Bowl 53 as a tribute to Hillenberg, the request came loaded with everything that episode meant to the generation that grew up with it. The petition spread. Within less than a week, it had over 770,000 signatures. It kept growing. By the time Super Bowl 53 arrived on February 3, 2019, the petition had accumulated over 1.2 million signatures. More than 1 million people had signed a document asking a football organization to play a song from a children's cartoon at one of the most watched television events of the year. The performer headlining the halftime show was Maroon 5, fronted by Adam Levine. Rumors began building in the weeks leading up to the game that SpongeBob would somehow be incorporated into the show. Maroon 5's official social media account posted a video teaser of their halftime preparations that included a brief clip of SpongeBob for approximately 1 second. It was the only cartoon in the entire teaser video. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, where the game was being played, had posted a GIF of SpongeBob in his band uniform back in December. Roger Bumpus, the voice actor for Squidward, reportedly posted on his personal Facebook that he was going to be making some kind of Super Bowl introduction for the halftime show. The pieces seemed to be falling into place. The halftime show began. Maroon 5 performed. About 3 minutes in, something happened. Squidward appeared on the stadium's big screen. SpongeBob appeared beside him. The crowd reacted. The fans watching at home reacted. For a moment, it genuinely seemed like it was happening. Then Squidward introduced Travis Scott, describing him as a true musical genius who needs no introduction. Travis Scott performed his song Sicko Mode. The SpongeBob segment had lasted approximately 3 seconds. Sweet Victory had not been played. Not the full song, not a portion of the song. The Bubble Bowl sequence from Band Geeks had been used as a brief visual transition between Maroon 5 and a rapper performing a song that had nothing to do with SpongeBob, Hillenberg, or anything the petition had asked for. The reaction online was immediate and overwhelming. Reddit filled with posts within minutes. The reaction threads on fan communities were not mixed. They were almost entirely negative. People who had signed the petition felt genuinely deceived. The teaser clips, the stadium GIF, the Bumpus Facebook post, the SpongeBob clip and the Maroon 5 video had all pointed towards something that turned out to be a 3-second visual flourish. Over 1 million people had organized around a request, and the response was a brief animation used to introduce a song. The streaming numbers told their own story. On February 1st and 2nd, the 2 days before the Super Bowl, Sweet Victory had been streamed approximately 46,000 times. On February 3rd and 4th, the day of the halftime show and the day after, it was streamed 310,000 times. That is an increase of 566%. More than 250,000 people heard the song play for 3 seconds on television and went and found the actual version. The song that was not played at the Super Bowl got more streams because of the Super Bowl than it ever had before. The response did not stop there. The Dallas Stars hockey team posted their own edited version of the Sweet Victory sequence from Band Geeks, spliced with footage from Dallas Stars games, on their official Twitter account, with the caption, "The Super Bowl halftime show fans deserve." That post got 2,000 retweets and 5,000 likes within a couple of hours. NASCAR used Sweet Victory for a promotional video for the 2019 Daytona 500. David Glenn Isley, the original performer of the song, released a special orchestral version in response to the renewed attention. The song even played briefly at the 2019 Kids' Choice Awards. What the fans did not know at the time, and what softened the reaction for some people when it came out, was that Sweet Victory had been played in full inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium after the televised halftime show ended. Not during the broadcast, not for the millions watching at home, but in the stadium itself, with a dedication to Hillenberg, the full version of Sweet Victory played for the people who were physically there. It was a tribute that the television audience did not get to see. In 2021, when Viacom CBS launched Paramount Plus as their new streaming service, the launch commercial featured a wide range of characters from across their property catalog, including SpongeBob performing Sweet Victory as they climbed toward the Paramount Mountain logo. The commercial was widely interpreted as a deliberate acknowledgement and partial making up for what had not happened at Super Bowl 53 2 years earlier. It received a far more positive reaction than the halftime show moment had. The Super Bowl 53 situation is worth understanding not just as a story about a fan campaign that did not fully succeed. It is worth understanding as a document of what Band Geeks meant to the generation that watched SpongeBob during its golden era. 1 million people signed a petition to honor a marine biologist turned animator by playing a royalty-free 1980s rock song at a football game, because that song, in the context of that episode, had meant something real to them when they were children. The show had given them a version of winning that felt honest rather than manufactured. Squidward had earned his moment in that episode in a way that felt true. And when Hillenberg died, that moment was what people reached for. The song ended up being played in full in a stadium after the cameras stopped rolling. Hillenberg's name got said out loud on one of the most watched nights in American television. It was not exactly what the petition asked for. It was not nothing either. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Band Geeks is consistently cited as the show's finest 11 minutes, but it is also, quietly, a demonstration of something specific about what the show was capable of during its golden era. The same era that produced Band Geeks also produced episodes that have spent years being almost impossible to find, not because they were banned or controversially pulled, but because the physical recordings have simply disappeared. There is a version of the SpongeBob pilot that almost nobody has heard. There are scenes that aired once and then vanished. There are pieces of the show's early history that the fan community has been searching for across decades and has not yet found. The story of SpongeBob's lost media is its own rabbit hole entirely, and it goes deeper than most people realize. Section 8. The Lost World of SpongeBob. There is a recording that exists somewhere in the world that almost no living person has heard. It is a fully voiced, 7-minute audio recording of the SpongeBob pilot episode, performed by the complete original cast, where the main character is called SpongeBoy throughout the entire thing. Tom Kenny's voice, the full performance. Every joke, every line, every moment of the episode that would eventually become Help Wanted. but with the wrong name attached to the character at the center of it all. The recording was confirmed to exist in a 2006 interview. It has never been released. It has never appeared on any DVD bonus feature. It has never leaked online in any form that has been verified. As of right now, it is simply gone from public access, sitting in a vault or on a shelf or on an old piece of audio equipment somewhere inside the Nickelodeon system. And nobody outside that system has heard it in over 2 decades. That recording is the most wanted piece of lost SpongeBob material in the entire fan community. But it is far from the only one. SpongeBob SquarePants has been running since 1999. That is over 25 years of production, which means 25 years of scenes that got cut before airing, audio that got replaced after broadcast, episodes that changed between their first airing and their later releases on DVD and streaming, and promotional material that aired once and was never preserved properly. The amount of SpongeBob content that has vanished or exists only in fragments is genuinely substantial, and the fan community that hunts for it has been active for years. Start with the pilot itself. The version of Help Wanted that aired on May 1st, 1999, following the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards, was already different from the version Hillenberg had originally recorded. The 1997 version of the pilot, made 2 years before the official premiere, had a completely different opening sequence. Instead of the familiar theme song, it began with fast-paced action sequence music and colorful paintings of SpongeBob. That 1997 version can actually be found online and appeared on a Best of Nicktoons VHS tape from 1998, so it is not fully lost. But the audio recording where SpongeBob is called SpongeBoy, which was made around the same period, has not surfaced alongside it. The end credits of the 1997 pilot version contain errors that were corrected by 1999. Bill Fagerbakkie's name, the voice actor for Patrick, is spelled as Bill Faberbaki in the 1997 version. Patrick Starr's name is spelled as Partik Starr. Gary the Snail, voiced by Tom Kenny, is not credited at all in the 1997 version. These small differences confirm that the 1997 and 1999 versions are genuinely distinct productions, not just the same thing with minor adjustments. Moving into the actual broadcast run of the show, there are dozens of scenes that were cut from episodes between their original air dates and their later reruns or home media releases. Some of these cuts were made for time. Some were made because of content concerns. Some happened for reasons that have never been officially explained. The Season 1 episode I Was a Teenage Gary is one of the most documented examples. The episode features a scene where SpongeBob is transformed into a snail in a sequence that was already considered frightening by a significant portion of the children who watched it. The original airing also included a full transformation sequence for Squidward, showing him change from an octopus into a snail. This sequence was cut from reruns and all subsequent releases. The official reason given was that it was too scary for children. For years, some fans believed the cut Squidward transformation might still exist in full somewhere in broadcast archives, but the episode as it appears in any accessible format today does not contain it. Nature Pants from Season 1 had a scene cut from reruns due to nudity. SpongeBob, who has chosen to live among the jellyfish and abandon his normal life, was shown behaving like a Tarzan character in a sequence that involved him without his square pants. This was removed after the initial broadcast and does not appear in any version of the episode currently available. The Sponge Who Could Fly, a Season 3 special presented as a lost episode within the show's own narrative, has its own real lost content sitting alongside it. The episode itself survives in full, but the original airing included a scene with the French narrator delivering a line to camera, saying, "Will SpongeBob learn to fly? Stay tuned." This was cut from the DVD release because DVD does not have commercial breaks, making the line contextually pointless without the break that was supposed to follow it. The scene technically survives as a piece of knowledge, but no widely available version of the episode contains it. Additionally, a scene where SpongeBob is covered in black paint was cut after at least one airing. The reason given was implied racism. This cut has been documented, but the original version with the scene intact has not been made publicly available in any official release. The Season 3 episode Plankton featured a deleted scene that was confirmed to exist via the Season 1 DVD commentary. According to that commentary, there was originally a scene depicting Squidward naked that was cut before the episode aired. It is unclear whether this scene was ever animated or only existed at the storyboard stage, and no images or footage from it have ever appeared publicly. Something Smells from Season 2 had a deleted line from Squidward at the end of the episode that was mentioned in the DVD commentary. He was supposed to say, "ugly" and "smell," 2 for 1. This line exists as documented knowledge from the commentary, but the actual audio has not been released separately. Beyond individual episode cuts, there are whole categories of SpongeBob material that have either disappeared or exist only partially. The Legends of Bikini Bottom miniseries, which aired in 2011, featured a set of wraparound segments with Patchy the Pirate reading stories as bedtime tales to Potty the Parrot. These segments aired with the episodes during their original television broadcast. When the episodes were released on streaming platforms and DVD, almost all of the Patchy segments were removed. Only fragments have been preserved, sourced from international broadcasts of the episodes, specifically from Nickelodeon Africa's uploads. A playlist collecting what has been found is incomplete. Most of the segments are simply gone from any accessible format. There is also an early United Plankton Pictures logo that has been confirmed as lost. United Plankton Pictures was Steven Hillenberg's personal production company, the one whose logo appears at the end of SpongeBob episodes. The version of the logo that most viewers know features the sound of seagulls and waves, but a different early version of the logo used the sound of a foghorn instead. This foghorn version aired during the show's earliest broadcasts and has been confirmed to exist by people who remember it, but the actual footage has not been recovered and does not appear in any currently preserved version of the episodes from that period. The SpongeBob press kit from 1999, one of the very first pieces of material produced for the show to help promote it to journalists and network executives before launch, is also considered lost or extremely rare. Press kits from that era were physical objects, printed booklets and promotional materials sent to specific recipients, and most of them were not preserved. One YouTube researcher named L Supersonic Q documented its existence and discussed it as one of the rarest pieces of early SpongeBob material known to exist. There is also a three-dimensional animated short called SpongeBob Rehydrated that aired on Nickelodeon and was a parody of the Matrix Reloaded film. It featured SpongeBob, rendered in a style completely different from the show's normal flat animation, moving through a version of the Matrix sequences. This short aired around 2003 and has essentially vanished from public availability. People who saw it as children remember it. Finding a complete version of it online has proven difficult for the fan community that has been looking. The Astrology with Squidward shorts, a series of brief segments that aired between 2000 and 2001, where Squidward delivered zodiac horoscopes for each astrological sign, are another partially documented piece of early SpongeBob content. The shorts had Squidward introduce each sign, make predictions, and close with the line, "I am Squidward, your Nicktoon astrologer." Some of these segments have been found and preserved. Others are missing. Related to this, a brief clip of Squidward wearing a turban was discovered by researchers who initially believed it was connected to the astrology shorts. Investigation revealed it was actually from a separate bumper segment that aired during a special broadcast block called SpongeBob's Nicktoon Summer Splash in 2000 and 2001. Most of the bumpers from that block are also lost. What all of this adds up to is a show that has been running for long enough that a meaningful portion of its early history has simply not been preserved in ways the public can access. Some of it sits in broadcast archives that are not publicly accessible. Some of it may have been lost entirely when the physical media it was stored on degraded or was discarded. Some of it exists in the memories of people who saw it air once and never saw it again. The SpongeBob Lost Media community is active and has been for years. Forums dedicated to tracking down these missing pieces have documented the known gaps, cataloged what has been found, and continued searching for the things that have not. The SpongeBob pilot audio with the SpongeBoy name remains the most wanted item on that list. The people looking for it know it exists. They know someone recorded it. They know the performances happened. They just cannot find where it went. There is something fitting about the most lost piece of SpongeBob being the version of the show before the name was fully right. SpongeBoy Ahoy, fully performed, fully voiced, sitting somewhere inaccessible. The version of the show that almost was, preserved in audio that almost nobody has heard. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The missing content tells one kind of story about what happened to SpongeBob over time, but there is another story running alongside it, one about what certain fans did with the show's gaps and mysteries and dark corners. Because while researchers were looking for lost pilot audio and missing bumper segments, a completely different community was building something else out of the parts of SpongeBob that unsettled them. They were writing stories and creating images and producing videos about what the show might really mean beneath its surface. And some of what that community produced became genuinely disturbing in ways the original show never intended. The 7 deadly sins theory is where that community's more grounded ideas live. But it does not stop there. Section 9. The 7 deadly sins and the theories that took over the internet. There is a version of SpongeBob SquarePants that lives entirely in the minds of the people who watched it. Not the show that aired. Not the episodes Hillenberg made. A parallel version built from fan theories, dark readings, and the specific kind of pattern finding that happens when a generation grows up with something and then revisits it as adults with more knowledge and more imagination than they had as children. Some of what that community produced is genuinely interesting analysis. Some of it is creative fiction dressed up as hidden truth. And some of it became so widespread that millions of people accepted it as confirmed fact, when it was never confirmed at all. The 7 deadly sins theory is the most famous example of the second category. The theory goes like this. The 7 main characters of SpongeBob SquarePants each represent one of the 7 deadly sins from Christian tradition. SpongeBob represents lust, defined not as physical desire, but as excessive enthusiasm and an overwhelming love for everything and everyone around him. Patrick represents sloth because he lives under a rock, does nothing productive, and has won an award within the show for doing nothing the longest. Squidward represents wrath because his defining emotional state is anger, resentment, and the desire to punish the people around him for failing to recognize his greatness. Mr. Krabs represents greed, which requires almost no explanation given that his entire personality is built around the acquisition of money at any cost to anyone. Plankton represents envy, because his entire existence is organized around wanting what Mr. Krabs has and being consumed by the fact that he does not have it. Sandy represents pride, because she defines herself through her intelligence, her physical strength, and her identity as a Texan, and responds with intensity whenever any of those things are challenged. Gary represents gluttony, because the recurring joke across multiple episodes is that SpongeBob must remember to feed Gary, that Gary ran away specifically because SpongeBob forgot to feed him, and that Gary's relationship with food is the most consistent thing about him. The theory is neat. The assignments are logical enough that they feel satisfying. The fact that there are exactly 7 main characters and exactly 7 deadly sins is the kind of coincidence that feels like it cannot be accidental. And the theory spread across the internet as though it had been confirmed, shared in social media posts and YouTube videos and Reddit threads as established fact about the show's design. It was not confirmed. It has never been confirmed. The people who actually made the show have addressed it directly, and their answers are consistent and clear. During a 2024 reunion video produced by Esquire magazine, the cast of SpongeBob SquarePants was asked about the 7 deadly sins theory, among other popular fan theories. Roger Bumpus, who voices Squidward, noted that he could see similarities for Patrick and Mr. Krabs specifically, but did not claim the connections were intentional. Doug Lawrence, who voices Plankton and has been a writer on the show since its beginning, gave the most detailed response. He said the idea was more like each character representing something, comparing it to the structure of a show like Gilligan's Island, where each castaway represents a different type of person. But he was careful to separate that general idea from the specific claim that the characters were designed to represent the 7 sins. His exact framing was that each character represents a specific kind of thing that is not as concrete as saying, it is lust, it is this, it is that. He was describing character archetypes, not confirming a deliberate religious framework. Tom Kenny, who voices SpongeBob and has been with the show since before the pilot, indicated that SpongeBob as a representation of lust felt like a stretch to him. His understanding of the character is closer to someone who wants to work at the Krusty Krab more than anything else, which is a form of passion, but a very specific and narrowly directed one, rather than the broad, excessive love that the theory assigns to lust. Stephen Hillenberg, who died in 2018 and never got to respond to the theory directly in a formal interview, was consistent throughout his lifetime about what inspired his characters. He drew them from his experiences as a marine biology teacher, from the animals themselves, from his own life, and from his love of absurdist comedy. He was not designing a religious allegory. He was not hiding a framework inside a children's cartoon. The show's roots were in the Intertidal Zone, his educational comic about tide pool animals, not in theological tradition. Multiple sources that have examined the theory critically point out the same fundamental problem with it. Any group of distinct characters with strong individual personalities can be mapped onto broad archetypes if you are flexible enough with the definitions. The 7 deadly sins are themselves broad enough that almost any human behavior fits into at least one of them. Calling Patrick's laziness sloth and calling Squidward's irritability wrath works because those are large categories, not because the characters were specifically designed to fill them. The neatness of the fit says more about how human beings find patterns than it does about how Hillenberg designed his cast. The theory's persistence is interesting on its own. It spread because it offered something the show's surface level did not. It offered the feeling that there was more going on beneath the cartoon than most people had noticed. That the show was secretly smarter or darker or more intentional than it appeared. That watching carefully enough would reveal a hidden layer. This desire to find hidden layers in SpongeBob is not unique to the Deadly Sins theory. It shows up across the entire fan theory community around the show, and in some cases, the theories point at things that are genuinely there. The nuclear testing connection, for instance, is not a fan theory in the same sense. It is a documented fact that Bikini Bottom is named after Bikini Atoll. Doug Lawrence confirmed on record that the nuclear test site concept was discussed during the show's development. Those are real things confirmed by real people. The Deadly Sins theory is different because the connection exists only in the pattern matching of the audience, not in anything the creators put there intentionally. There is a middle category that sits between confirmed fact and pure imagination, and several SpongeBob theories live in it. The idea that Mr. Krabs' increasingly extreme behavior across the show's run represents a character who was slowly corrupted by the removal of the guardrails Hillenberg had placed around him during seasons 1 through 3 is not a fan theory so much as an observation that the evidence supports. The character changed. The show changed after Hillenberg stepped down. The connection between those two facts is not hidden or coded. It is visible in the episodes themselves. The theory that SpongeBob and Sandy's relationship across the first 3 seasons was built with more emotional complexity than the show usually gets credit for is also grounded in actual episode content rather than speculation. The episode Texas from Season 1 and the episode Pressure from Season 2 both contain real emotional stakes around Sandy's identity and her place in Bikini Bottom. These are not readings imposed on the show from outside, they are in the writing. But the fan theory community around SpongeBob did not stay in the territory of grounded observation. It went significantly further. The creepypasta community, which produced internet horror stories designed to disturb readers, found SpongeBob to be rich territory. The most famous of these is a story called Squidward's Suicide, also known as Red Mist, which describes a supposed lost episode of SpongeBob involving extremely disturbing imagery. The story was written as though the narrator had seen a real, unaired episode at a Nickelodeon screening. It describes the episode in detail, including content that would be completely impossible for a children's network to produce or distribute. Squidward's Suicide is not a real episode. It has never been a real episode. There is no evidence that Nickelodeon produced anything resembling what the story describes. It is a work of creative fiction in the creepypasta format, designed to unsettle readers by attaching fictional horror to a familiar property. The story is well written enough as a piece of internet horror that it spread widely and was believed by a significant number of young readers who encountered it without context. It contributed to a broader cultural idea that SpongeBob contained hidden dark content that the network was suppressing, an idea that the show's actual documented history does not support in the dramatic ways the creepypasta suggests. The reason these theories and stories found such a receptive audience in SpongeBob's fan community specifically comes back to something real about the show. SpongeBob, particularly in its golden era, genuinely did contain emotional complexity that went beyond what most children's cartoons attempted. The show was sincere in a way that left impressions. Squidward's loneliness was real. The gap between SpongeBob's happiness and the world's indifference to it was real. The show trusted its audience with feelings that were not resolved neatly, and that emotional honesty created space for fans to believe the show was capable of going even further in directions it never actually went. The Deadly Sins theory is the most mainstream version of this. It presents SpongeBob as a show with a secret intellectual framework, designed by a creator who was encoding hidden meaning for people smart enough to find it. The real Hillenberg was a thoughtful person who built careful, layered characters. But he was not hiding a theology textbook inside a cartoon sponge. He was making something that felt true about people by using sea animals and absurdist humor. And he did it well enough that the audience could not stop looking for more. What the theories ultimately reveal is not what Hillenberg intended. They reveal how much the show meant to the people who watched it. The effort that goes into mapping 7 characters onto 7 sins, or constructing elaborate lost episode narratives, or finding nuclear test imagery in explosion animations, is the effort of people who care deeply about something and want that something to have been as significant as it felt to them. The show earned that devotion honestly, through the quality of its best work. __quote_8__. That best work was concentrated in a specific window. Seasons 1 through 3, produced under Hillenberg's direct creative oversight, are the episodes that generated the devotion. The shift that happened after Hillenberg stepped down in 2004 is one of the most discussed quality changes in animated television history, and it was not subtle. The show that came back in Season 4 was recognizably SpongeBob in name and character design, but something essential had shifted. What that something was, why it changed, and what Hillenberg's return in 2015 did and did not fix, is the story that explains everything that came after. Section 10. The Rules, the Fall, and the Return. Stephen Hillenberg did not just create SpongeBob SquarePants. He built a set of walls around it. rules that he enforced while he was in charge, that shaped what the show was allowed to do and not do, and that kept the world of Bikini Bottom operating inside a specific emotional logic. Those rules were not written down in any document that has been made public. They were enforced through his presence as the person running the show. And the story of what happened to SpongeBob after Hillenberg stepped down in 2004 is largely the story of what happens to a carefully built world when the person who built the walls steps away, and the walls start coming down one by one. The rules themselves are known through a combination of interviews, DVD commentaries, and the observations of people who worked closely with Hillenberg during the first 3 seasons. Several of them have been confirmed directly. The first and most famous rule was that SpongeBob would never get his driver's license. This is not a small creative decision. The entire dynamic between SpongeBob and Mrs. Puff, his boating school teacher, is built on the fact that he cannot pass the driving test and keeps failing in increasingly spectacular ways. Hillenberg loved this dynamic. He found it funny and emotionally true. SpongeBob is someone who tries repeatedly at something he cannot master, who believes in himself despite all evidence, and who keeps showing up regardless of the results. Mrs. Puff is someone who has been trapped in that dynamic for years and is visibly being worn down by it. The relationship only works because SpongeBob never succeeds. If he gets his license, the relationship ends. The show loses one of its most reliable sources of both comedy and genuine character texture. But Hillenberg had a second reason for this rule that gets less attention. He said that keeping SpongeBob out of a driver's license protected the show from a specific kind of pressure Nickelodeon executives had already applied. Those executives wanted SpongeBob to be a child who goes to school. They felt the show would be more relatable to its young audience if the main character was the same age as the viewers. Hillenberg disagreed. He wanted SpongeBob to be an adult, someone with a job and a home and an established life, even if that adult had a childlike personality. He eventually compromised by adding Mrs. Puff's boating school to the show, which gave SpongeBob a school-like environment without making him a child. But the driver's license rule was also a structural protection against the network ever being able to push SpongeBob back toward a younger, more conventional children's cartoon protagonist. As long as SpongeBob never gets his license, he stays in school but never graduates, which keeps the compromise intact forever. The second confirmed rule was that the identity of Pearl's mother would never be revealed. Pearl is Mr. Krabs' teenage daughter, a sperm whale living with a crab father, and the show has never explained this. The biological impossibility is never addressed. Her mother is never named, never shown, never described beyond the most indirect references. Hillenberg decided this mystery should remain permanently open. It has been over 25 years, and the show has honored this rule more consistently than almost any other, with Pearl's mother remaining one of the most deliberately maintained unanswered questions in the series. The third rule was the Krabby Patty formula, covered in depth earlier. It would never be fully revealed. The show has kept this one as well, right up to the present day. The fourth rule was that SpongeBob would not have a romantic interest. Hillenberg made this decision based partly on the biology of real sea sponges, which can reproduce without a partner, and partly on a desire to keep SpongeBob's relationships uncomplicated by romantic storylines. He described the main characters as almost asexual, and said this was a deliberate choice to keep the show free of a type of story he was not interested in telling. SpongeBob's devotion is directed at his friends, his job, and his world, not at a romantic partner. These 4 rules, taken together, paint a picture of a creator who was protecting specific things about his show. He was protecting a dynamic between SpongeBob and Mrs. Puff. He was protecting a mystery about Pearl's family. He was protecting a running joke that functioned as the show's central conflict. And he was protecting a version of the main character that was defined by enthusiasm and friendship rather than by romantic longing. Each rule was a wall keeping something specific safe. Hillenberg stopped production of the show after season 3 in 2002 to focus entirely on the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. He halted episode production because he did not want to try to make a movie and run the series at the same time, saying directly that he would rather concentrate on doing a good job on one thing. The movie came out in November 2004 and was a genuine success, earning $140 million worldwide and receiving positive reviews from critics. Hillenberg had always intended the movie to be the ending of the show. He designed it as a conclusion, a final story that brought SpongeBob and Patrick's journey to a complete stopping point. He wanted the movie to be the last thing, the period at the end of the sentence. Nickelodeon did not want a period. Nickelodeon wanted the sentence to keep going indefinitely, because SpongeBob was the most profitable thing they had, and the idea of it ending was not acceptable from a business standpoint. This is where the split happened. Hillenberg was not willing to continue the show after the movie. Nickelodeon was not willing to let the show end. Nickelodeon owned the property. They had the legal right to keep making it, with or without Hillenberg's direct involvement. Hillenberg resigned as showrunner rather than continue under those circumstances. Paul Tibbitt, who had been a writer and director on the show since its earliest days and knew the characters well, took over as showrunner for Season 4. Season 4 premiered in 2005. The fan and critical response to the shift in quality that accompanied it has been documented extensively in the years since. The change was not imaginary, and it was not subtle. Several things happened simultaneously that altered what the show felt like. The emotional precision of the writing loosened. Episodes in the Golden Era had a specific quality where every character's behavior in a given episode felt like it came from something real about who that character was. SpongeBob's optimism was consistent with his psychology. Squidward's frustration came from a real place. Patrick's obliviousness had an internal logic. In Season 4 and beyond, characters began behaving in ways that served the joke of the episode without connecting back to anything established about them. Squidward became more purely a punching bag and less a character with genuine interior life. Patrick went from cheerfully unaware to actively stupid in ways that sometimes crossed into mean. Mr. Krabs, as discussed in the one-course meal section, drifted from eccentric and greedy to something closer to genuinely cruel. The show also began relying more heavily on gross-out humor in a way that Hillenberg had specifically avoided during his tenure. The Season 8 episode House Fancy contains a toenail removal sequence involving Squidward that is frequently cited as one of the most viscerally unpleasant things the show ever put on screen. It has no emotional purpose. It is discomfort for the sake of discomfort, which is precisely the kind of content Hillenberg had kept out of the show during Seasons 1 through 3. The torture episode formula, where a single character is subjected to escalating misery for an entire episode's runtime with little narrative purpose, became a recognizable pattern in the post-Hillenberg seasons. Squidward torture episodes became their own informal category discussed in the fan community. Episodes like Good Neighbors, which aired in Season 4, and later A Pal for Gary from Season 7, where SpongeBob buys a dangerous pet that terrorizes Gary for 11 minutes while SpongeBob remains oblivious, were cited repeatedly as examples of the show losing the emotional compass Hillenberg had maintained. None of this means the post-Hillenberg seasons contained no good episodes. They did. Writers who genuinely loved the characters continued to produce strong work within the changed environment. But the average quality dropped, the emotional logic became inconsistent, and the specific warmth that had made the Golden Era feel like something special became harder to find. Hillenberg came back. In January 2015, 2 months after the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water finished production, Hillenberg returned to the franchise as an active participant. His return was not announced with much fanfare. He did not come back as showrunner in the same way he had been for Seasons 1 through 3. But according to Vincent Waller, who had been working on the show and became co-executive producer during this period, Hillenberg was involved in every stage of production after returning. Every recording session, every writing session, every meeting. He was present and engaged in a way that went beyond a ceremonial role. His return coincided with a period that many fans and critics have identified as a partial recovery for the show. Season 9, which began airing in 2012 and continued into the period of Hillenberg's return, showed signs of improvement compared to the lowest points of Seasons 6 and 7. Season 10 and beyond, produced with Hillenberg actively present, continued this recovery in a way that was not a full return to the golden era, but was meaningfully better than what the show had been producing in his absence. In March 2017, Hillenberg announced publicly that he had been diagnosed with ALS. He said he would continue to work on the show for as long as he was able. By every account from people around him, he kept that commitment. He attended recording sessions and production meetings while his health allowed. Vincent Waller confirmed that Hillenberg was alive during the storyboard and writing phases of the episode SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, though he was not able to directly contribute to the boarding or script by that point. Hillenberg died on November 26, 2018. The episode SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout and the SpongeBob movie Sponge on the Run both contain dedications to him at the end. The Sponge on the Run movie, released in 2020, also briefly shows an image of the original SpongeBob character, the prototype with a different name, as part of a tribute to Hillenberg's history with the character he created. The spin-offs that followed his death represent the clearest evidence of what his presence had been protecting. Camp Coral, a spin-off series showing younger versions of SpongeBob and his friends at a summer camp as children, began production in 2019 and premiered in 2021. Paul Tibbitt, the showrunner who had succeeded Hillenberg after the first movie, said publicly that he did not believe Hillenberg would have approved of a SpongeBob Babies-style show. The rule Hillenberg had enforced about SpongeBob being an adult, about the show not turning its main character into a child for the network's convenience, was precisely the kind of rule that Camp Coral breaks. SpongeBob in Camp Coral is a child. He goes to camp. He is the young version of himself that Nickelodeon had wanted from the beginning and that Hillenberg had specifically refused to provide. The Patrick Star Show, another spin-off, premiered in 2021. These expansions of the SpongeBob universe into multiple simultaneous productions were not something Hillenberg had ever indicated he would have wanted. He had spent his career protecting the show from being stretched and diluted. He had turned down deals and resisted pressure and resigned his own position rather than see the show continue past where he felt it naturally ended. The franchise he left behind has moved in almost every direction he spent his life trying to prevent it from moving in. What Hillenberg's rules reveal, in the end, is not just a list of creative preferences. They reveal a theory of what makes a fictional world work. The rules were not arbitrary restrictions. Each one protected something. The driver's license rule protected a relationship and a character dynamic. The Pearl's mother rule protected a mystery that gave the world texture. The Krabby Patty rule protected the show's central conflict. The no romance rule protected a version of the main character that was defined by something other than desire. Together, they protected SpongeBob from becoming ordinary. An ordinary children's cartoon gives its main character a love interest. It lets him grow up and get his license. It reveals its mysteries so the audience gets the satisfaction of an answer. It turns its villain into a bigger and bigger monster so the stakes keep escalating. Hillenberg refused all of these things. He kept the show inside a specific emotional loop where SpongeBob starts each episode with full, sincere enthusiasm, encounters the world, and returns to his pineapple, ready to do it again tomorrow. The rules kept that loop intact. The loop has been broken in various ways since his death. The spin-offs changed it, the commercial deals changed it, the long middle seasons changed it before he came back to try to repair it. But the first 3 seasons, the ones produced entirely under his oversight and according to his rules, remain exactly what he intended them to be. They have not changed. They exist in the same form they always did. And the generation that grew up with them, that signed 1 million petitions and built fan theories, and went looking for lost audio, and felt the loss of Hillenberg as something personal, knows exactly what those seasons felt like. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The final piece of this story is about a moment that should have ended everything. A ban that happened quietly, lasted years, and has only recently been lifted. An episode that Nickelodeon removed from circulation in 2018 and said almost nothing about, which then became one of the most discussed pieces of censored children's television in recent memory. Section 11. The episode Nickelodeon quietly erased. There is a specific kind of removal that is different from a ban. A ban is loud. It comes with announcements and explanations and press coverage. It generates debate. People argue about whether the decision was right or wrong, and the thing being banned gets more attention because of the argument than it ever would have gotten otherwise. What Nickelodeon did to a Season 3 episode of SpongeBob SquarePants in 2018 was not a ban in that sense. It was quieter than that. It was a removal. The episode simply stopped being available. It disappeared from streaming platforms. It vanished from rotation. No announcement was made. No press release was issued. No explanation was offered to the public for 3 years. The episode is Midlife Crustacean. It is the second segment of Season 3, Episode 15. It originally aired on January 24th, 2003. For 15 years after that date, it was a completely normal part of the show's broadcast rotation, airing in reruns, available on DVD, accessible to anyone who wanted to watch it. Then, in 2018, Nickelodeon quietly pulled it. The removal remained largely unnoticed outside dedicated fan communities for several years. It was not until 2021 when journalists began examining missing SpongeBob episodes following the removal of another segment that Nickelodeon publicly confirmed Midlife Crustacean had already been taken out of circulation in 2018. The reason the removal stayed quiet for so long is worth understanding on its own. Nickelodeon did not remove the episode with any public statement in 2018. They simply stopped airing it and stopped making it available on streaming. The episode existed in a kind of limbo, present on some DVD releases that had already been manufactured and distributed, but absent from everywhere a person would normally go to find a SpongeBob episode in the modern era. Paramount Plus, the streaming service that carries SpongeBob, did not have it. The episode had effectively been made inaccessible to the majority of the audience without anyone being told this had happened. The removal only became public knowledge in 2021, and it became public in an unusual way. In the spring of 2021, Nickelodeon pulled a separate episode called Quarantined Crab from their lineup. Quarantined Crab was a Season 12 episode that featured a virus spreading through the Krusty Krab and forcing everyone into quarantine. The episode had been written approximately 2 years before it was scheduled to air, with no connection to any real-world events. When the COVID-19 pandemic began in 2020, the episode's storyline became uncomfortably close to what was happening in the actual world, and Nickelodeon made the decision to hold it back. They released a statement explaining this decision, which was a reasonable one and was generally understood by the public. The press coverage of the Quarantined Crab removal prompted journalists to ask Nickelodeon about other episodes that might be missing from circulation. This is when a Nickelodeon representative confirmed publicly for the first time that Midlife Crustacean had been out of rotation since 2018. Nickelodeon later confirmed that the episode had been removed following a standards review, which determined that some story elements were not appropriate for the show's audience. The review took place in 2018, during a broader period when many media companies were reassessing older content under updated cultural standards, though Nickelodeon itself did not directly link the decision to any specific social movement. That statement, delivered to IGN in 2021, was the first official acknowledgement that the removal had happened and the first explanation offered for it. 3 years after the episode was pulled, the public was told why. The story elements in question center on a single scene in the episode. The setup of midlife crustacean is actually quite strong as a piece of SpongeBob writing. Mr. Krabs is going through a midlife crisis. He feels old and irrelevant. His customers call him dried out. He cannot get out of bed with any enthusiasm. SpongeBob and Patrick, trying to help, take him along on a night out with the intention of making him feel young and alive again. The early portions of the episode follow this premise with genuine affection, and the comedy of Mr. Krabs trying to fit in with SpongeBob and Patrick's version of a fun night out is well executed. Then Patrick announces that the final activity of the evening is a panty raid. For viewers who do not know this term, a panty raid is an activity that was depicted as a prank in older American popular culture, typically involving men or boys breaking into a building and stealing underwear as a form of joke or dare. The concept appeared in films and television from the 1950s onward, and was generally treated as harmless mischief in the media of that era, though the actual act involves entering someone's private space without permission and taking their belongings. In Midlife Crustacean, SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs break into a house at night and steal a woman's underwear. Mr. Krabs finds this thrilling. His youthful energy is restored. He feels alive again. Then the reveal comes. The house they broke into belongs to Mr. Krabs' own mother. She is waiting for them when they are caught, and Mr. Krabs' punishment is being sent to his room by his mom, which is the episode's closing joke. The episode treats the raid primarily as a comedic adventure, with the embarrassment of being caught by Mr. Krabs' mother functioning as the punchline, rather than the moral consequence of the act itself. The wrongness of the act is acknowledged only through the accidental identity of the victim, not through any suggestion that breaking into someone's home to steal their underwear is in itself unacceptable behavior toward the woman whose home it was. Nickelodeon's Standards Review identified this sequence as not appropriate for the show's audience. The decision to remove the entire episode, rather than edit out the specific scene, was apparently made because the panty raid sequence is structurally central to the episode's second half, and cannot simply be cut without the episode losing its narrative logic. The situation around the episode became more complicated in July 2023, when Midlife Crustacean briefly reappeared on the Paramount Plus channel, available through Amazon Prime Video. Fans quickly noticed the episode had become accessible and began discussing it online. Paramount responded with a statement explaining that the episode had been posted due to a technical error and had been inadvertently made available before being removed again. The episode disappeared once more within hours of being noticed, returning to the same strange status it had occupied since 2018, part of the show's history, but largely inaccessible through official streaming platforms. No reversal of the original removal decision was announced. No explanation was given for when or whether the episode would return in any official capacity. The contrast between how Midlife Crustacean has been handled and how another deeply controversial episode has been treated is one of the more revealing things about how content decisions get made for this show. Interestingly, One Course Meal, the Season 7 episode which depicts Plankton being psychologically tormented to the point of attempting suicide, has never been removed from circulation. There has been no public confirmation that Nickelodeon conducted the same kind of standards review for that episode, which makes the difference in treatment notable. One episode was quietly erased for depicting a break-in involving underwear, the other depicting sustained psychological torture and a character lying in a road waiting to be hit by a bus, has remained continuously available throughout the show's entire run. The difference in treatment likely comes down to the specific nature of what each episode contains. Midlife Crustacean's problematic element is a discrete, identifiable scene that can be described in a single sentence and evaluated against a specific standard of what is appropriate for children. One Course Meal's problematic element is more diffuse and harder to categorize within the framework of content standards for children's television. It does not contain anything that can be described in a single sentence as obviously inappropriate in the way the panty raid can. Instead, it contains a sustained emotional situation that is deeply uncomfortable if you engage with it seriously, but which is technically constructed as comedy throughout. It is harder to write a policy statement about. The international dimension of how SpongeBob episodes have been handled adds another layer to this. International broadcast standards have sometimes produced different decisions around SpongeBob episodes. Some markets have historically avoided airing content involving underwear or suggestive humor in children's programming, and midlife crustacean has been reported as restricted or altered in certain international broadcasts, though documentation of those decisions varies. Other international markets have made their own cuts and adjustments to various episodes throughout the show's run, and the patterns of what different countries considered acceptable versus unacceptable for children reveal a great deal about where different cultural lines are drawn. The episode Sailor Mouth from Season 2, which features SpongeBob and Patrick discovering a bad word written on a dumpster and using it repeatedly while it is bleeped and replaced with a dolphin sound, generated parent complaints in the United States when it first aired. The episode is now considered by most people to be one of the more clever and well-executed jokes in the show's history, a case where the censorship is itself the comedy. But it generated real concern at the time from parents, who felt that even the suggestion of swearing in a children's cartoon was inappropriate. That episode has never been removed from circulation. What the midlife crustacean situation ultimately reveals is that the standards being applied to SpongeBob episodes have shifted significantly over the 25 years the show has been running. Content that was produced, approved, and aired in 2003 was judged differently in 2018 than it had been at the time of its creation. This is not unique to SpongeBob. It is a pattern that has affected a wide range of older media as social standards have evolved, and as the institutions controlling that media have become more attentive to questions of what is appropriate to show to children. The question of whether midlife crustacean should have been removed does not have a clean answer. The argument for removing it is that a scene treating the invasion of a woman's home and theft of her belongings as a fun adventure is not content that serves children well, regardless of how normal it might have seemed in 2003. The argument against removing it is that pulling episodes from a completed creative work based on evolving standards is a form of revision that applies current thinking to past material in ways that can become a process with no clear stopping point. What is certain is that the episode's disappearance from official platforms, and then its brief accidental reappearance before being removed again, represents one of the stranger chapters in the show's long history of dealing with its own content. A Season 3 episode that aired without incident for 15 years was pulled without announcement, became briefly accessible by accident, and then returned to being unavailable without comment is a piece of SpongeBob history that the official record treats as though it never fully happened. The years it was gone are not acknowledged. The reason it came back briefly is described only as an error. That quiet management of the show's history, the absence of any formal accounting for what happened and why, fits a pattern in how SpongeBob's complicated moments have generally been handled. The show's best work has always spoken for itself, loudly and clearly, through the quality of what it put on screen. Its troubled moments have tended to be managed through silence. Episodes disappear. They reappear accidentally. No one explains the gap. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That silence extends to a set of facts about the show's creation that almost no casual fan knows. Facts about what Hillenberg built into the character of SpongeBob himself at the deepest level, drawing directly from his own life, his own work history, and his own understanding of what the ocean actually is. The final section of this iceberg goes all the way down to the foundation, to who Steven Hillenberg actually was before he ever picked up an animation pencil, and what he quietly placed inside the most cheerful character in the history of children's television without ever announcing it directly. Section 12. The Man Inside the Sponge. Everything in this video has been building toward a single question that most people who watched SpongeBob as children never thought to ask. Not what the show meant, not what the theories say, not what Nickelodeon did with it after the creator died. The question underneath all of those questions is simpler and more important than any of them. Who was Steven Hillenberg actually? And what did he put of himself inside the character he spent his life building? The answer changes everything about how SpongeBob reads. Not in a dark way, not in the way the nuclear testing connection changes it, or the way one-course meal changes it. In a warmer and more specific way than either of those. The answer is that SpongeBob SquarePants is, in ways that have been confirmed and documented, a portrait of the person who made him. And once you see the connections between Hillenberg's actual life and the character he created, the show stops being a cartoon about a sponge and starts being something closer to a love letter, written in the only language Hillenberg felt fully comfortable using. Start with the ocean. Hillenberg was born in 1961 in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is about as far from the ocean as you can get in the United States. But he grew up in Anaheim, California, close to the coast, and from the time he was a child, he was fascinated by the sea. He loved Jacques Cousteau, the French ocean explorer whose documentary films brought underwater life to television audiences in the 1960s and 1970s. Cousteau made films that treated the ocean as a place of genuine wonder, a world operating by its own rules, with its own beauty, and Hillenberg absorbed those films completely. The French narrator who opens SpongeBob episodes, the one who says things like, "Ah, the sea," and describes the events of each episode in a voice that sounds like it belongs in a nature documentary, is a direct tribute to Cousteau. Hillenberg built a Cousteau reference into the structural framing of every single SpongeBob episode that ever aired. It has been there from the pilot. Most viewers heard it hundreds of times without knowing what it was pointing at. After high school, Hillenberg took a summer job that would later become one of the most recognizable details of the show's entire premise. He worked as a fry cook and lobster boiler at a seafood restaurant in Maine. He stood behind a grill. He cooked food for customers. He did the job that SpongeBob would later do with complete and boundless devotion in a fictional underwater restaurant. The connection between Hillenberg's real summer job and SpongeBob's life work is not a coincidence or a vague inspiration. It is a direct transfer. The person who created the most famous fictional fry cook in the history of children's television had been an actual fry cook first. Hillenberg went to Humboldt State University in Northern California, where he studied marine resources and graduated in 1984. He then took a job at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, an organization dedicated to educating the public about marine science and ocean history. He taught marine biology there. He led groups of students and visitors through lessons about tide pool animals, the creatures that live in the shallow water where the ocean meets the land. And because he also loved to draw, he created a teaching tool for his students. He wrote and illustrated a comic book called The Intertidal Zone, featuring a cast of anthropomorphic sea creatures who explained ocean science through their adventures. The Intertidal Zone is where every major SpongeBob character came from. The sponge in that comic, a character called Bob, who served as a host and guide, became SpongeBob. The starfish became Patrick. The crab became Mr. Krabs. The comic was not published commercially. It was a classroom tool, something Hillenberg made to help his students connect with material that might otherwise feel dry and distant. He was not trying to create a franchise. He was trying to be a good teacher. The fact that the classroom tool eventually became one of the highest-grossing media properties in the history of American entertainment is the kind of outcome that nobody plans for, and that Hillenberg himself described as completely unimaginable. He taught at the Ocean Institute from 1984 to 1987. 3 years of standing in front of students and visitors, explaining the lives of creatures that most people walked past without noticing, using a hand-drawn comic featuring a cheerful sponge to make the lesson land. Then, in 1987, he made a decision that changed the direction of his life. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts to study animation. He had always drawn. He had minored in art during his undergraduate years, but he had told himself that studying art full-time was not practical. He changed his mind. He went back to school at 26 years old to pursue the thing he actually wanted to do. At CalArts, he made 2 animated short films. The first was called The Green Beret, completed in 1992. The second was called Wormholes, also from 1992, which won an award for Best Animated Concept at the Ottawa International Animation Festival and was shown at several international animation festivals. The success of Wormholes was directly responsible for what happened next. The short came to the attention of Joe Murray, the creator of Rocko's Modern Life, a Nickelodeon animated series. Hillenberg was offered a job on the show. He worked on Rocko's Modern Life from 1993 to 1996, starting as a director and eventually becoming the creative director of the series. This is where he learned the practical craft of running an animated television show. He learned how the production process worked, how to manage a writing team, how to translate creative ideas into finished animation within the constraints of a television schedule. He also formed relationships with people who would become the core team of SpongeBob, including Tom Kenny, who voiced Rocko himself and would later become the voice of SpongeBob. The SpongeBob team was largely assembled from people Hillenberg had worked with and trusted from his time on Rocko. During his years on Rocko's Modern Life, one of the show's writers, Martin Olson, read the intertitle zone and told Hillenberg he should turn it into a television series. Hillenberg had not seriously considered this before. He had watched Joe Murray struggle with the pressures of running his own show and had told himself he never wanted to go through that. But Olson's encouragement planted something. In 1994, while still working on Rocko, Hillenberg began quietly developing the characters and concepts from the intertitle zone into what would eventually become SpongeBob SquarePants. Rocko's Modern Life ended in 1996. In 1998, Hillenberg established his own production company, which he called United Plankton Pictures. The name alone tells you something about the person. He named his company after the smallest, most overlooked organism in the ocean. Not after himself, not after the show he was about to make. After plankton. After the thing that is invisible unless you are paying close attention, that forms the foundation of the entire ocean food chain, that keeps everything else alive without most people ever thinking about it. Steven Hillenberg named his production company after the thing that holds everything up without getting credit for it. The pitch for SpongeBob was presented to Nickelodeon in 1997. Hillenberg and his team brought the Pitch Bible, a document he had written and illustrated himself, to the meeting. By all accounts, the presentation was unconventional. Hillenberg reportedly brought a marine biology tank with models of the characters placed inside it to show the executives. He wanted them to see the world of the show as a physical space, not just as drawings on paper. He played Hawaiian music during the presentation. He was, in other words, completely himself in a meeting that most people would approach with maximum professionalism and minimum personality. Nickelodeon's executives liked what they saw, but had one significant request. They wanted SpongeBob to be a child who goes to school. They felt this would make the character more relatable to their young audience. Hillenberg refused. He wanted SpongeBob to be an adult, with a job and a home and an established life in his community. The compromise they reached, adding Mrs. Puff's boating school to the show's world, gave SpongeBob a school environment without turning him into a child. It also, as discussed earlier, produced one of the most durable and well-constructed character dynamics in the show's history. The show premiered on May 1st, 1999, following the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Awards. The pilot episode, Help Wanted, introduced the full world of Bikini Bottom, the Krusty Krab, SpongeBob's pineapple home, his relationship with Patrick, his relationship with Squidward, and his complete and wholehearted devotion to his job. All of the essential things about SpongeBob were present in the first episode. The character arrived fully formed because Hillenberg had been building him since 1984. 15 years of thought went into the pilot. The musical landscape of the show was another place where Hillenberg's personal tastes shaped what ended up on screen in ways that most viewers never knew about. He was a significant fan of a band called Ween, whose 1997 album, The Mollusk, had a nautical and underwater theme that aligned closely with the world Hillenberg was building. He reached out to the band after the album came out, explained what SpongeBob was, and asked if they would contribute a song. They sent one on Christmas Eve. That song, called Loop-de-Loop, was used in the Season 1 episode, Your Shoes Untied. A piece of SpongeBob was built from a personal connection Hillenberg made with a band he genuinely loved, on his own, because the music fit the world he was trying to create. The first two lines of the SpongeBob theme song have their own origin story that traces back directly to Hillenberg's time at the Ocean Institute. He and his colleagues at the Institute used to sing a short pirate-style song to entertain young visitors and students during events. The first two lines of that song, the ones sung by the chorus at the opening of every single SpongeBob episode that has ever aired, came from that real, informal workplace song that a group of marine educators made up to entertain children at a marine science institute in California. The theme song of one of the most watched cartoons in history started as a work song between teachers. Mr. Krabs was based on a specific real person. Hillenberg's manager at the seafood restaurant in Maine, where he worked as a fry cook, was apparently the inspiration for the character. The obsessively money-focused, slightly chaotic energy of a restaurant owner running his business with maximum greed and minimum regard for his employees came from someone Hillenberg had actually worked for. The Krusty Krab is not a purely invented institution. It has a real ancestor in a real seafood restaurant in Maine, where a young Stephen Hillenberg stood behind a grill and watched his boss operate. Pearl, Mr. Krabs' whale daughter, was inspired by Hillenberg's time supervising whale watches at the Ocean Institute. He spent years watching real whales from boats, learning their behavior, and helping educate visitors about them. Pearl entered the show as a character because whales were part of Hillenberg's actual working life before he ever became an animator. Karen, Plankton's computer wife, was named directly after Hillenberg's real wife, Karen Hillenberg. The villain's spouse in SpongeBob SquarePants carries the name of the creator's real partner. SpongeBob's physical appearance, his gapped teeth, his slightly awkward proportions, the specific quality of nerdiness built into how he looks, was based in part on how Hillenberg himself looked as a young child. He described SpongeBob's design as including nerdy gapped teeth that reflected his own appearance. The most recognizable face in children's television for the past 25 years was drawn, in part, from Hillenberg's memory of what he looked like as a kid. What all of this adds up to is a picture of a man who made a show that was almost entirely built from his own life. His summer job became SpongeBob's career. His teaching years became the educational foundation of the world. His classroom comic became the cast of characters. His manager became Mr. Krabs. His love of whales became Pearl. His wife's name became Karen. His childhood face became SpongeBob's face. His love of Jacques Cousteau became the French narrator. His work songs became the theme. His favorite band's music appeared in the episodes. His production company was named after the smallest organism in the ocean because that was how he saw himself in relation to the world he was trying to build. And SpongeBob himself, the character at the center of all of it, is the version of Steven Hillenberg that he was most comfortable presenting to the world. Endlessly enthusiastic about a job most people consider small. Genuinely devoted to the people around him without needing them to deserve it. Incapable of cynicism, not because he is naive, but because he has decided sincerity is worth more than protection. Happy every morning, ready to try again every day, completely undefended against a world that does not always return his warmth. Hillenberg was a marine biology teacher who became an animator because he could not stop himself from drawing. He made a show about a fry cook who could not stop himself from cooking. He built a world out of everything he loved and put his own face on the character at the center of it, and then spent 15 years protecting that world from every force that tried to change what it fundamentally was. He died in November 2018. His ashes were scattered off the coast of California, close to the ocean he had spent his entire life studying, teaching, drawing, and loving. Close to where Bikini Bottom is supposed to be. The show is still running, the spin-offs are still being made, the merchandise is still being sold. The world Hillenberg built keeps expanding in directions he would not have chosen and cannot control anymore. But the first 3 seasons are exactly what he made them. They have not changed. They will not change. And inside them, if you watch carefully enough, you can still see the marine biology teacher from the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, standing in front of a group of students with a hand-drawn comic about tide pool animals, trying to show them something wonderful about the world beneath the water. That is what SpongeBob SquarePants actually is. Not a franchise, not a brand, not a content platform or a merchandise category or a theme park attraction. A marine biology teacher's love letter to the ocean, disguised as a cartoon about a sponge who really loves his job. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.